calling the Board of Supervisors regular meeting to order for Monday, April 4th. If everyone would stand, please, for a pledge of allegiance and moment of silence. So it's removed. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Moment of silence. Thank you. The adoption, the agenda in front of us.
Madam Chair, I move that we adopt the agenda as presented.
I'll second.
A motion and a second. Any discussion?
Is there an addendum item that we were to take up today? I'm not seeing it, but I saw one circulated by email.
No, there's nothing added.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Moving into presentations, school report was posted.
Yes, Superintendent Grimsley's unable to be here today. She's on a trip showing the whole, I guess, collective industry of schools, how good we are. So
That's awesome.
that's
In
good.
San Diego, California.
Yeah. Good crew out there.
Really great.
Next, we have the Virginia's, sorry.
Go ahead.
Oh, okay. Certified County Supervisors Program presentation of certificates and completion. We have Carrie Walker from Virginia Association of Counties here for the presentation.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the board, Administrator Curry, county staff, and citizens. I'm Carrie Walker, Coordinator of Programs and Development from the Virginia Association of Counties. Thank you for the invitation to attend your meeting today and for the privilege to visit your beautiful county and present certificates of completion to Chair Donahue and Vice Chair Whitson for completing the VACO Virginia Certified Supervisors Program. The Virginia Certified Supervisors Program is a master levels leadership program that was designed in 2006 to provide training to enhance the leadership and decision-making skills of our county supervisors in Virginia. It's a 5-course program, and students complete 65 hours of classroom instruction and 35 hours of home study. Over the 15-year time span in the program, we've had more than 100 graduates, and the supervisors have represented more than 40 counties from across the Commonwealth. And now, on behalf of VACO, congratulations to our graduates in Rappahannock County. Chair Donahue and Vice Chair Whitson, we would like to thank each of you for your participation and your contributions to the success of the program. I would be honored if we could have our picture taken together in celebration while I present your certificates to you. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Carrie. Do you want to do it one by one first?
And then together.
Okay. Put this down here for a moment.
Wow, those are nice.
Very nice.
Okay.
One, two, three.
Wow, that was easy. Okay. This will be harder work. This one will be harder. How do I hold it like that?
Sure.
Okay. All right. Carrie, thanks a lot for coming out.
Thank you so much.
We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Take the long way.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Give our best to Mike.
Boxes are right back here. If you want to step in.
Okay. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Next on the agenda, we have Vincent Day, a senior hydrologist with Cardno, C-A-R-D-N-O, and Bradley, last name? White, sorry, groundwater geologist with the Virginia Department of Environmental Quality, I think. If you'd like to come up and talk to us about water in Rappahannock County, that would be wonderful.
Sure, yeah. And there's a, like a handle on the back of the microphone, you can raise it
Tall.
taller. Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Oh, I see. Pull the trigger.
There you go.
Gotcha. We were invited out here today to, I guess, initiate a discussion about monitoring groundwater resources in Rappahannock County. So I feel like my job today is to sort of just get the ball rolling. And so I've got a couple of slides to help out with that. I figure it's probably best to start out with trying to get everybody on the same page, so to speak, in terms of conceptualizing a fractured rock groundwater flow system. This is a very idealized cross-section of a groundwater flow system in crystalline rock. And there's just a few things I want to point out. I don't want to get too in-depth on it or anything like that, but there are a few small points that are, I think, worth noting. It's what I call a dual porosity type of system. And by that I mean there are two media in which the water moves through in this type of hydrogeologic setting. The first part is the weathered zone in weathered bedrock and the soil, and water occurs in those conditions as responding solely to gravity, gravitational forces. Water moves from the high points on the landscape laterally through the weathered zone and ultimately winds up discharging from springs and into streams. The second part of the system is a deeper part that some of the water from the weathered zone infiltrates into. And this is the fractured rock component of the groundwater system. And the porosity in this portion of the system is solely dictated by the occurrence of fractures. If you don't have fractures, you don't have water. The density of fracturing, the orientation of fracturing is all really dependent on the metamorphic and structural history of the rock, which is why you can drill a well and hit, nothing but rock dust and then move over 20 feet and pick up, 30 gallons a minute. And it has everything to do with the presence of fractures. These fractures also they're pressurized. So, and the pressure results from the weight of the water on top, basically, and of the overburden. So if you drill a well into a fracture, the water level in the fracture will rise in the well bore to a level inside the well that is equivalent with the pressure at that point in the system. That's why it's preferable to drill a well in fractured rock versus in the weathered zone, because you have pressure driving the force. It's a lot easier to get the water out versus just letting it drain out of the overburden. So it's a complex system. You never really know what you're going to get into. You could spend, a PhD working on one site and still never get it all figured out, just because you can't see. You don't, so you have to do your best at collecting relevant information and tell the story as best you can, basically. So how do you monitor something like this? And I think the answer to that is really sort of rhetorical, and it's what are your objectives? Like, you have to define your objectives before you can go about, punching in wells or putting in stream gauges. You have to have a clearly defined question that you want answered. Okay, next slide. So here's just some examples, and this is what I mean by getting the discussion going really here. Larger scale objectives often involve looking at things at like the watershed scale, and that's where stream flow discharge measurements come in handy. They're a very important metric for monitoring how much not only surface water moves through the system, but groundwater as well. Because when you look at a stream, all the water in the stream can be divided into a surface water component and a groundwater component. And there are ways to separate those two sources of water and actually make inferences or quantify the amount of groundwater that is discharged from upstream in the watershed to the monitoring point. And that's very handy information if you're trying to answer broader questions like, well, how much, on average in the county do we get in terms of groundwater recharge? Stream flow data can give you a decent estimate of that, or a better handle on that. Obviously, down there on the lower right, groundwater levels monitoring is a huge component, or can be, of monitoring groundwater systems. And there's lots of different ways to go about monitoring water levels. You could have a fairly dense network of observation wells that are being utilized to monitor impacts in a portion of the system due to pumping or something like that. Or it could be as simple as a single well that's installed for monitoring long-term responses to, say, changes in climatic conditions. It just kind of depends on, what it is, what kind of information you're after. More site-specific information, I've touched on hydraulic testing. That's where you pump a well, monitor the shape or the plot of drawdown over time, and you can analyze the shape of that, and it can tell you certain specific information about the fractured rock network that the well is installed in. And again, I'd like to reiterate that because these are systems that are totally controlled by fracturing, all the systems are essentially discrete. You could drill a well on one side of Little Washington and say it was in a transmissive fracture network and pump the daylights out of it, say 100 gallons a minute, 50 gallons a minute, whatever you're fortunate enough to get. Odds are you're not going to see drawdown on the other side of town, and that's because they're in different fractured networks. So it's an important point I'd just like to try and drive home on that. So how do you find the fractures? More site-specific, what methods are mapping and geophysics, so you can drill down to more local levels as well on monitoring efforts. And then I'm going to make a quick sales pitch here, if I can go to the last slide. It just so happens there is a monitoring opportunity. We've got funding to install what they call a climate response network well. We're trying to put 10 of them in the Piedmont and Blue Ridge portions of the county, or state. The upper Rappahannock watershed would be a great spot for one. There are currently no wells like this in the Rappahannock watershed. And so I just wanted to put that out there. And the objective of it would be to drill through the overburden and into the first fracture zone that makes water, and then just monitor levels over the long term. And this is down here on the bottom right is an example of the type of data that are displayed in near real time on the web. And the bars represent by month maximum and minimum recorded water levels in that well for that period of record. So this well has a 60-year period of record. It's in Gordonsville. Now the red dots are the daily current water levels. So you can at a glance look at that and see relative to the range in water levels for that time of year what conditions are like, you know, in that particular area. And it's a sentinel. It's it's a representative type thing. In aggregate for us, it gives us a lot of information about drought severity and everything else. But at a more local level, it's something that you can look at and say, well, things are low, but they're not as bad as they were back, you know, in 1980 or, you know, whenever, however long the well's been there. So with that, I'm going to step back and take questions. There's contact information. And I don't know, Vincent, if you have anything that you'd like to add? Or?
I think you said it all. I thought I saw myself coming in if you had any questions. I brought a few slides that might be helpful if it needs to.
So my basic question, I think the objective would be clear, and I mean, I'll let my colleagues speak for themselves, but if we could take advantage of that well program, I think it's a great opportunity. And my colleague, Mr. Carney, sits on the Rappahannock River Basin Commission, and so we're represented there, and
Oh, yeah.
and we're the headwaters representatives there. Most of the people are northern neck types who talk about, you know, things that aren't relevant to Rappahannock County. So I think this all points in the right direction. My question is, once you gather baseline data from that type of site, then what do we do with that data set? Because we can't create water. So if we got to a point where there was a clear trend going in a not good direction, and Mr. Fletcher's spoken to this just based on his experience living here for decades, I just wonder, what do we do with the data, and how do we improve our overall groundwater situation?
I think the data at that point has already served its purpose by letting you know that there might be a problem. And then from that point forward, you could start, you know, thinking about different management scenarios in terms of, you know, finding water and managing it.
I think it's from the way I see it is.
Step up to the mic, please. Yep.
Yeah, from the way I see it is that this program that Brad is talking about, it looks at the holistic picture, and that the data that he's collecting here is meant for sort of the Western Piedmont, but you mix it into everything.
Okay.
And so site specifically for Rappahannock County, forgive me, but I don't see it really being that useful a tool for you to determine. It depends on, like he said, what's your question?
Yeah, right.
What's your question? Are our water levels going down? Well, they might be going down in this particular well,
Right.
but it may not be in your well.
Would it be fair to say, if I might interrupt real quick, that it would give you a regional picture?
Yes, in terms of impacts from climatic stressors, drought, or conversely for helping to answer questions about, well, what did this recent snowfall, what kind of effect might that have on local groundwater levels? It's not going to be an accurate, it's not a measurement of groundwaters everywhere in the region. Obviously it's at one point, but it's, like I say, a sentinel type well, and in combination, say with the Orange well, there's one in Fauquier, you start to look at all three and you can start to put a more cohesive sort of picture together about what's going on climatically speaking, you know, how groundwater levels may be responding.
Years ago, I was part of the team that monitored a well at Pete Estes' place, right there at the corner. Pete used to own that. And that was very useful. I mean, it was measured, there's a whole lot of data on that. And that was measured over years, 8 or 10 years, but that was manual, right? Sending somebody up to measure it and stuff. But it's interesting to look at during the drought, 1999 through 2002. And you look at that water level there, and you know, everybody was looking at the creek at that time, and it was very, very low and scary. But the water levels in those wells, didn't really, reflect what you were seeing on the surface. So it gave you a sense that perhaps the groundwater regime was doing a lot healthier, right?
And if I may, the stream flow data is also very useful for looking at the same thing in a sense. There's a technique you can do called base flow separation that gets at the groundwater component of stream discharge. So if you see, say, a decrease over time in that, it's essentially the same sort of method for looking at, I guess, a different tool for looking at trying to answer the same questions about long-term climatic trends. And there's the Hazel River stream gauge, I believe monitors about, I think Rappahannock is, it's got about 2/3 of the county that it's, from water coming from 2/3 of the county passes through.
Is that gauge at 522 there near Boston?
I think so.
Yeah.
It's been forever since I've
Yeah.
seen it or been around it, but that's right.
Yeah.
How would you select this? Oh, sorry.
Sorry, Mr. Fraser had
Well, I think there's also one at Hazel River at 229, which is just
Oh, okay.
south of Rappahannock County. But if we could go back to the well locations,
Yeah.
are those on private or public properties?
I'm glad you asked that question. We're trying to put it on public property just to try and get away from change of property problems and things like that, because we want to try and keep the well in service for as long as we can, I mean decades hopefully. So any kind of public, stable piece of land would be ideal. But
You also need a well that's under demand so that you can tell if there's actually a fluctuation?
no, we would want it to be reflective of natural conditions.
Dedicated well just for that
Yes.
purpose?
And I don't know if we've got funding to drill it, to equip it, and site prep and cleanup. We just need a decent place to put them.
Who
So
would be responsible for the annual operating costs?
we would cover that, yeah. The only thing on your end would be the piece of property, and then I'm required to do an access agreement too. And, I'll be glad to provide that, just so you can look it over
And
if there's interest.
How, I guess it's not really related to stream flow, so you wouldn't necessarily have to locate it far upstream on one of our mountain streams. It could go anywhere in the county, really.
That's correct.
Okay.
Ideally, it would be great I don't think there's any public land in the Battle Run watershed, but that would be super, because there is Battle Run is a small gauged watershed in the county with a stream gauge already, so it would
Oh, yeah, right.
you get water levels and flow information from that watershed, but I don't know if there's.
We're trying to get more stream gauges up in the county, just even to help our downstream neighbors in terms of flash flood prediction and that sort of thing. And I mean, through the River Basin Commission, there seems to be an angle, but it's strangely a very bureaucratic thing that's been going on for years. But we're trying to get more gauges up here. I mean, it just seems like we ought to have more than just that one.
Mr. Carney, I think you had something.
Mr. Fraser actually asked my question, but I do have an additional question, which is, would we have access to that data in perpetuity at any point?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
It'll all be hosted on the U.S. Geological Survey website, so, and archived there. So it'll be coming in near real time.
So the board has one deed restricted piece of property, and that's your landfill. So if there was a place that was side gradient or up gradient at that site, you would know that, deed filed away in the clerk's office, you can't do anything with that. So that's a place that, wouldn't be disturbed for a very long time. Somewhere on this parcel that's out of the way, chances are the courthouse is going to be here for a very long time, and So if it were not in the way of some future development, you could probably do something near here as well, tucked over near the radio tower or something like that, so that you knew there was already some impediment to you developing the space. But other than that, I'm not really sure where would.
Well, that's not a deed restricted property, but the county
This
owns the
isn't.
25 acres over there at the elementary school. The county owns the ball fields.
Yeah,
That's not owned by the schools.
that's true, but, you know, in 60 years, who knows what's gonna happen? And that's why,
Right.
in 60 years, pretty sure you know what's gonna happen at the landfill. It's gonna be a closed landfill, just like it is today. It's hard to have that view, long view. But of course, you'd have to work with the other side of DEQ to make sure it's side gradient, and we don't want to do anything to allow anything that would ever be in the groundwater to transfer vertically,
Right.
when it's not able to do so now.
I'm wondering, that's a good thing to talk about probably at another time in terms of your selection site, but you get over, you're talking about the Amosville landfill? You're getting out a little farther into the Piedmont, I think, or maybe from the watershed, I don't know, but maybe not. But how about the Flatwood?
Yep.
Flatwood's not very large. The county didn't retain about 5 acres of that.
Do they have a well there now?
There's a
There's
drinking
a
well.
Yeah, there's
Oh,
a,
I see.
there's a well. Okay. What's the timing on pursuing those?
I don't imagine we'd start drilling until fall at the earliest, so we've got some time.
And presumably we have to file with DEQ a letter of interest or letter of intent from our board if we agree to do it.
All we need is, to my knowledge, and I'll double check, just the access agreement and put that on file and then be good to go.
Maybe we could put that on our agenda for the next meeting, and if we just need to send a letter and figure out those details.
So I can work with Brad to look at a few different sites in the county that might work, and then he can analyze those and see if he thinks they're appropriate, and then bring a couple choices to the board at your next meeting with whatever agreements in draft form.
It'd be great.
Okay.
Thanks a lot. That was
Sure.
super interesting.
Thank you.
What's the light blue on that map? I was just curious.
Oh, okay, so this is an
To the
example
west.
of that's a geology layer
Yeah.
with a well layer superimposed on it.
Uh-huh.
And I just have very sparse, so short answer to your question, I believe that's charnockite, it's a type of rock.
Uh-huh.
But the different circles represent well yields, higher and lower well yields, and it's just an illustration to show you the types of things you can do with GIS information.
Yeah.
So,
I was just, because everyone talks about Sperryville, that's why I was asking the question. Sperryville has a pretty difficult groundwater recharge situation, so I was just curious if that geologic layer might relate to Sperryville's struggles, because I think that's where Sperryville is.
I would say that Sperryville's problem finding water in some places is more site-specific
I see.
than geologic.
I see. Okay.
You know, you have so many intense buildings or postage-sized lots stuck up against the hill there.
I got it.
On one side of the river, so
I see. Okay.
a lot of competition for
Okay.
not much quarry.
We good?
Yeah.
Thank
Thanks a
you so
lot.
very much for being here. During public comment, we can speak to them and we can
Which
get
is
back
next?
to you.
okay,
Thank you.
all right, thank you.
Thank you. Speaking of public comment, that is next on the agenda. Anyone wishing to speak, if you'll please raise your hand, go up to the mic, give us your name and the district you're in, and we'd love to hear from you.
My name's Bill Fletcher. I live in Miss Smith's district. I'm a little familiar with what they said, or what, I don't know this gentleman. I've known Vincent almost all my life, and I respect him greatly. I think that I tried to look at this when I made a presentation to the board some months ago about how do we retain water on our fields and our land. We get basically, as I understand it, we have 40 inches average a year in Rappahannock County, which figures out 25,000 acres for 25,000 gallons for 1 inch of water, which figures out 1 million gallons per acre falls on the land in Rappahannock, which is a lot of water. Got plenty of water. The questions I have are, what is the retention rate or rate of the water on the land when it falls and how it falls? The other thing I think you need to consider is the development that's coming and is down at Clevenger's Corner. We've got like 1,000 homes being built or something, and how much is the projected value? Because as I understand it, water seeks its own level, and we're the highest point, so all our water is naturally going to flow away unless we keep it here some way. The BDA, because of the Army Corps of Engineers, there are restrictions about putting VDAs in, and you have to get permits. Unless the Board of Supervisors gets involved, you aren't probably going to get involved in that. The other problem you have in Rappahannock that not a lot of people understand, and I think it's a serious health concern, is the amount of heavy metals we have in our land that's come up before this board before, from the pollution and from the coal-fired plants in Kentucky and West Virginia. I think some expert testified on solar before the board 4 or 5 months ago. I understand what these gentlemen said, but I live near Sperryville on one of my farms and another one down 231, and I don't know why the reasons, but we've had artesian wells. A well that was artesian in 1990 is now, we've got to pump it 120 feet. Now that's a specific incident. I know it's probably, Vincent can probably explain it, but it's concerning to me. I've had 7 springs go dry on Turkey Mountain, which is probably one of the bigger mountains in the county. And I don't have enough water on my farm consistently to have 200 cows there regular full time. Well, that's a big change from the 70s and 80s in Rappahannock County. We used to be able to carry 250 cows with no problem. Now I'm having trouble carrying 125, and with cost of fencing and all, it's almost prohibitive to farm cattle land. I think the board has a tremendous opportunity, and Vincent and his friend didn't cover this, but I really think the Board of Supervisors should talk to the health department and get them to fill out those well logs, because I think that's data you can get. And it would be, you'd get some data each time a well was dug, and you could see what was going on in that geological region. This came up 4 months or 5 months ago before the board, and I don't know anybody that's talked to the health department yet. I think that's a disservice, because it's something we could, it's free information if the health department would just do their job and do the logs. That would give you a truth. And there's no testing wells right now in Rappahannock County like they're asking to do. I'd be glad to talk to them about maybe putting it on the Thornton River if that's appropriate. I'm glad to help. The other thing I found out today that was interesting, and I don't know how relevant it is, but in Idaho, they've advised farmers not to grow potatoes because they think a drought is coming. They're doing it, and droughts in the weather patterns are determined in the West, and they go across the country, I've always understood. So I think if we do this, or we start getting the information and compiling it, we probably don't need it now. But there's going to come a time, 20 years ago, we had a major drought. The land, I can't speak for the whole county, but my land in my yard turned black and cracked. If you get a couple years of drought, I mean, Texas has 10 or 20 years of drought. And with the changing weather pattern, if you believe in that, we better start trying to think a little forward and just reacting to the individual problems. And I hope you all will consider seriously Vincent and his friend's proposal. I think it makes a lot of sense. But I think one of the things you should do is definitely get the health department to do the well logs and get that straight. You can't just keep reacting. You've got to kind of plan for the future. And if you don't plan for the future, the county's going to be in trouble. Now, we all have different views of what the future will behold. But things change so quickly now, and it's hard. I mean, there's no central place to find out about the weather in Rappahannock, the historical pattern. I tried to find Dennis Wingfield. Mr. Yao now does a weather station in the county, but nowhere is it compiled. Nowhere can you find it. Dennis's information is all long gone. I mean, you may be able to get 15 years history in one part of the county and not another. And you take all the water that comes out of Rappahannock County, which is billions of gallons, and it's all, I believe 90% of it is all just rushing through the county and going away, and we need to do something. Water is life. And you also need to think as a Board of Supervisors about how we can clean up this ground. I think Rappahannock County right now, I'm not really a Democrat or a big environmentalist, but I think you've got an opportunity now to look towards the future and maybe get plans in place or assist farmers to clean up the land and then clean up the water. Water, I mean, the water we're drinking now is the same water the dinosaurs had, but it's a hell of a lot more polluted now. And it's real polluted in certain areas of Rappahannock. We still have some super fun sites in Rappahannock, whether you recognize them or not. And I think it's incumbent on us to think of a way to clean the water and the land for the citizens of Rappahannock. All we get out of this Board of Supervisors right now mainly is a tax bill. I'd like you all to do something for the future of the county and prepare us so we can go into the 22nd, 23rd century well prepared. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sign none of their hand, sorry. Yes, sir.
Afternoon, Board. I wish I had Bill's voice. Last month, we addressed the Lfcc renaming, and I didn't hear anything about it. So it gives me an opportunity to address it again because I think it's important. And I want to consider transparency in our government as well. The renaming of LFCC is not a one-off thing. It's part of the global reset. Some 25 community colleges were subjected to renaming. I don't know how many's been renamed, but several. It's not just like some authority in Richmond made up his mind to change the name for Lord Fairfax. I think we understand renaming these colleges are joined at the hip with other globalist issues like energy production, inflation. The Federal Reserve printed $30 trillion and sent it to foreign banks and domestic banks with no accountability. The pandemic was created to basically enable stealing of our elections. Both political parties have been big players in this. The Democrat Party playing a much bigger role. The Democrat Party is totally corrupt. I don't see how they can ever represent government to the people again. The Democrat Party should be torn out by the root, thrown on the trash pile. As we convene here today, Biden is renaming U.S. forts like Fort Benning, Georgia, Fort Hood, Texas, A.P. Hill. Some context on that. In 2015, the Pentagon declared it would not rename any military installations named after Confederate generals, saying the renaming occurred in the spirit of reconciliation, not division, and declined to comment, to make further comments in 2017. January 2021, within 3 years of enactment, the United States Secretary of Defense is required to implement a plan developed by the Commission and to remove all names, symbols, displays, monuments, and paraphernalia that honor or commemorate the Confederate States of America or any person who served voluntarily with the Confederate States of America from all aspects of the Department of Defense. I mean, this goes to our heritage and our culture. So in this context, I hope the board will revisit this renaming of Lord Fairfax and make known your thoughts and actions. Maybe conclude each member's position on the issue so the public can understand what your feelings are. Maybe put it in a communique to the public. Transparency, very important to government, and we need to right a wrong. Thank you all.
Thanks, Roy.
Thank you.
Roy.
Thank you, Roy.
Okay, thank you. Sheila Gressinger, Hampton District. I had a favorite saying a long time ago, if you wait till you need something, you're too late. So I think what Bill was saying about the water is very important. And there's a documentary that I watched about a week or so ago. It's called Kiss the Ground. And I think it's very important because it addresses water issues and how you can restore your water and take care, taking carbon out of the air and replenishing the soil, which is very important. So there's a whole ecological balance that you have if you're taking good care of your earth, and that's going to be restoring the water. There's another example is when the wolves were restored out west. They were a part of the cycle that then took care of big animals, little animals, and then the whole balance started back again where the streams were formed again and the whole thing became well again, healthy. And I think that's the direction we need to go, but you need to act, and so you need to put a plan together. I don't know if any of you have watched that movie. Then there was the other one, The Biggest Little Farm, that actually showed how a couple took land that was totally dead because it had been overworked and poisoned, and they got investors, and then they actually took care of introducing various things. They had a mentor, and it took 10 years to actually do it. And the crux, the beautiful ending, was that there was a huge thunderstorm, and their neighbors had runoffs and floods and all this, and their land was then healthy and had been restored, and so all the water went where it was supposed to go. And that's what we're looking for in Rappahannock. And we do have farmers here. We do have people who, and newcomers who are coming. They want to be able to see healthy ground. The Millers did the same thing with the way they are rotating their cattle and the sheep. And there's a balance as the way they do that. And I think Michael Sands is doing the same thing with his land. So there are ways to do it. And then there are other places who are talking to landowners about leasing land to farmers, young farmers, so they don't have to buy land like Waterpenny. They have a long-term lease, and so they've been able to have an ecological balance and make money as well. So there's hope for us, and I'm really proud of Rappahannock. Just go for it some more.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Ron Makala from Jackson District, and I'm here today as the chairman of the BZA. At your last meeting, Mr. Fraser placed an item on your agenda in order to allow himself to express his personal feelings in regards to how the members of the BZA conduct business that they are duly appointed to carry out by the Circuit Court. I'm taking this opportunity to respond to his presentation.
First off,
You're
you're wrong. That was for the board's response, not mine.
Mr. Fraser.
So
Excuse-
whatever you're going to say was wrong. Go ahead.
Are you done?
I said.
Mr. Makla, go ahead.
Thank you. On March 23rd, the March 23rd meeting, to my knowledge, was the first time Mr. Fraser had attended a meeting since I have been appointed to the board. In the middle of the public hearing on an agenda item, Mr. Fraser chose to stand and begin a lengthy criticism of how the board members were conducting their meeting. He questioned why the board was asking questions in regard to the legal status of the application that was before them. He questioned why the board had asked their attorney, as permitted under Rappahannock County Code 170-140-H9, to employ or contract for secretaries, clerks, legal counsel, consultants, and technical services within the limits of funds appropriated by the board, which is you, to the to be present at the meeting, the attorney. Anyways, the issues Mr. Fraser were addressing had nothing to do with the application that was the subject of the public hearing. Mr. Fraser was told that his concerns were not relative to the public hearing, and he was asked to sit down. He refused and continued his tirade. He was asked to sit down 10 times before he relented. His uncontrolled tirade disrupted the meeting and was out of order.
Madam Chair, point of order, he is specifically targeting me with a bunch of falsehoods. This should not be continued.
Thank you, Mr. Fraser. As far as I understand, you're supposed to address the entire board, not any particular board member. As long as you can do that, I'll let you continue.
We will continue here. Let me find out where we are. Okay. At this meeting, the sitting members of the BZA were, at this meeting, I might have to paraphrase these things now. So, at this meeting, the members of the BZA were accused of being the worst members that had been in service for 40 years. It was stated that the meeting was a fiasco. Yes, a portion of the meeting was a fiasco, but it was during the time that an individual was giving inappropriate testimony on a public hearing. The 5 members of the BZA, the outbursts certainly were not appropriate or warranted. The 5 members of the BZA are appointed by the Circuit Court. We take our job very seriously. The members take the time to do their homework on every item that comes before us. We conduct our meetings according to the local and state codes. We make our decisions based on applicable codes, not who's making the application. We do not legislate. In regards to training, myself and Mr. Kuhn and Ms. Kuntz are both certified by the state program. Ms. Ritter and Mr. Tiggleman, they attempted to take the course this last time around, and because of problems with the course itself, they were unable to complete it. But they will be taking the course when it is presented in person at the next opportunity. And right here. Oh yeah, Ms. Pierce, I've lost my place. Oh, let's be on the next page. Yes, Ms. Pierce, who has served on the Planning Commission for a number of years and was the chairman, has also said that she's interested in taking the course. So probably by the end of this year, all 5 members will be certified. This will probably be the first time in the history of Rappahannock that this is the case. Okay, also with the recent leadership course that was presented by the county in December, 4 of the 5 members on the board were present at that meeting. Ms. Coons couldn't be there because of business commitments, and she was out of the area. So we have taken every opportunity to certify and be educated in order to do our job well. The members of the BZA have stepped forward and volunteered to providing needed service to the community, and to be accused of not having their abilities true is not, paraphrasing again, and the board to question their abilities is truly distressing and disrespectful.
Thank you. Anyone else? Public comment?
No,
We should wait.
in the context of the budget.
Thank you for asking. All right, we have, oh, Mr. Captain.
You did the right thing, that's ridiculous.
I'm John Capielli from the Hampton District. This is going to sound a little odd. No more odd than anything else.
Can you pull the microphone up just a little bit? Yeah, there you go.
How's that? Better?
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay. No more odd than some of the things that get said here. In response to a statement that was made in the newspaper, I do not want to see Mr. Whitson publicly embarrassed or pointed out that something was his fault. It's not. I think that was wrong as a mischaracterization. All the board members try to do what they can, and how they do it is their business. But for somebody to turn around and point out one member and say everything in the county is their fault is wrong. I was at the meeting that was just spoken about. It got emotional. Sometimes people will get emotional, and instead of following what would be the rules, and that happens. I understand that. That's why we have courts. That's why we have laws. We have other things. I get along with Mr. Curry really well. I get along with Mr. Goff real well. I get along with our tax department really well. It's not a me versus the county kind of thing. It's just, that's all I want to say. Other than that, it's nice to come to see these things because there's no commercials.
Thank you. Anyone else in the courtroom? We have quite a few people on Zoom. If anybody wishes to speak during public comment, please raise your Zoom hand and Mr. Curry will unmute you. They're hearing everything okay. All right. I'm not seeing any hands raised. At this time, I'll close the public comment period. We'll move into consent agenda.
Thanks, Carrie. Drive safely.
Thank you, Carrie.
Could I say one thing quickly before we get into consent agenda? I noticed Mr. Price is joining us today on Zoom, and I just wanted to thank him. We've had several power outages in the Piedmont District. One in particular was at the end of one of the, I think it was one of the Elite 8 games, and it was in the last 2 minutes of the St. Pete's game. And while its power was not restored quickly enough to watch the end of the game, it was restored in about 2 hours, and it was an outage that affected most of the village. So it was very much appreciated, and I know there's been another outage since then that was restored in about 6 hours in a very challenging place. So just many thanks to REC for the work that they do in the challenging conditions in the county.
Yeah, and I want to echo that. I mean, REC's been fantastic, and we had that the big outage and crews were unbelievable. And then I read recently, and maybe it's one of the instances you're talking about, there's a homeowner in the county whose power went out for some reason on their property in the middle of the night, and REC was there digging things up and figuring out the problem. So I've said it before, I'll say it again, you've been a great partner and we're really impressed. So thank you.
Here, here.
Thank you so much.
All right, can I have a motion on the consent agenda?
I'll put forward a motion that we adopt the consent agenda.
Motion, do I have a second?
Second.
The motion is second, any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Thank you. Appointments. We have Board of Building Appeals. We have two.
I believe after your last meeting, there was some press on this, and two people came forward and submitted applications for the local Board of Building Appeals, Mr. Atkins and Mr. Smith. You're all familiar with Mr. Atkins, works for the county and is a erosion control inspector. Mr. Smith is an architect who lives in the Piedmont district somewhere.
He actually lives in the Stonewall.
Oh, he does, sorry.
And I can say that I'm familiar with Mr. Smith, and I think he would be a fantastic candidate for this position, this appointment.
Is that a motion?
I will make a motion to appoint Mr. Norman Smith.
And that has an end of term of December 31, 2024. Is that implicit in your motion?
Oh, I'm sorry, what was the term, sir?
Expiring December 31, 2024. That's to keep the different appointees separated by year when possible.
Keep it staggered as possible.
That's the word I was looking for.
I'll second that.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any
Aye.
opposed? Thank you. No new appointment on the ag.
Not seeing any for the Agricultural Districts Advisory Committee. There will be, I think, 3 of those coming up here in the next few months.
All right, we'll move into old business budget work session, decision on budget and tax rate, public hearing notices.
I think there's a few things that the board might want to touch on while having this item open. We go to the end of the discussion, and then you can work your way back. Before the end of today, I will need direction from the board as to what your public notices, public hearing notices that we place in the paper for both the tax rate and the budget should state. There are 2 draft notices attached to this agenda that are consistent with the budget that's attached to this agenda, and the changes between the county administrator's proposed budget and the version here are highlighted, as I noted to the board previously. There are a lot of questions that are still open, I think, relative to the budget, and those can be managed between now and in the time of adoption.
Okay.
The critical point is, what budget are you going to share with the public and ask for them to provide you feedback? One of those points that I know that has been of some interest is related to the tax relief for elderly and other eligible groups. Commissioner Revenue is here, and I know she shared some information to the board since your last work session, and I suspect she's willing to answer questions on that, and she's actually made some recommendations to the board. I would suggest that if the board has an interest to implement changes, that you consider doing that after the public hearing. Otherwise, I'm going to have to make a lot of changes to the document before tomorrow, when I need to get the notice to the paper.
So if you could just repeat that, so what action might we take in response to the Revenue Commissioner's presentation?
One of the biggest issues with her recommendation is that it's difficult to put a dollar value on the impact. So of the relief side. So you can change the rules of who is eligible for relief, but you don't know who will apply. And you don't know income necessarily.
Right.
So you don't know who's eligible to apply.
Yep.
So of the universe of people who are eligible, only a subset actually do. And that's a personal decision. So it's hard to know what the dollar impact to your budget would be. Now, the board could move forward and take actions knowing that if for some reason the changes caused a drastic reduction in revenue, you have a fund balance and you could absorb that. You would get that feedback loop in a year, and then you'd be positioned to make whatever changes or tweaks next year to increase revenue into some other area to cover for that. But it's not something you can really handle. Now, there are some other recommendations that she made that may make predictable changes, some predictable changes now, but I'll leave that to Ms. Graham.
Mary Graham, Commissioner of the Revenue, Jackson District. Oh, this one.
There you go.
Yes, us big people.
Do you have handouts?
I do. I think there's 6 there.
That's okay, thank you.
I would also like the opportunity to discuss my other proposal that I emailed after this, hopefully. All right, this is long, I apologize, because it's kind of a complex situation. And there's not one answer, it may not be a simple answer. I wanted to make sure you understood what the program is. So the first couple pages talk about what the tax relief program is about, who it serves. It's for residents, they own their own home, it's their sole residence, they're 65 or older, or permanently and totally disabled. So people in need. They meet certain qualifications. They have a household income under a set limit. They have a net worth under a set limit. Those limits are set by the board. So how do I determine how much exemption to give each of these people? Well, at this point, if they meet those qualifications, it's 100%. And on that third slide, I've put the code references, both the state and the county. I have printouts of both of them, but there's a lot of pages, so I figured you could go online and look at it if you need to.
Okay.
So for me, the goals would be to make a more equitable program, and responding to board inquiries, how could we expand the program? And also just some administrative issues that I've seen over the years that I've been administering it. All these things interconnect. So you kind of have to look at the whole thing before you decide what you're going to do. So the fifth slide, and I'm sorry I didn't have this ready. I thought I was going to do this last Thursday, and so I didn't have these things submitted, but if you need them later, Gary, I can give them to you.
Yeah, and just for the listening public, I will, if you provide those to me, I'll attach them to this board docs agenda items so they'll be available in the future.
Perfect. So if you look at that slide, the fifth one, there's 2 scenarios. So the first column is somebody who does not qualify based on this year's threshold of $34,020 household income. The second column is somebody who does qualify. You'll notice the household income is pretty close, $500 different. Net worth, the one who does not qualify could have as little as, $25,000 net worth next to $250,000 net worth of the one who qualifies. The one who didn't qualify may have a very modest home worth $110,000, whereas the one who qualified because of income level may have a $650,000 home. Well, that person will get an award of $3,695, whereas the other person would get 0. I have problems with that personally. So to me, the next slide, problem one, is the all or nothing aspect of this program. As soon as you over a number, which is based on the consumer price index increases year to year from a base level given to the Commissioner of Revenue Office by the Board of Supervisors years ago. So once you go over that threshold, you are not eligible. One of the things I sent to you last week was a compilation of looking at 25 different jurisdictions, 25 different counties, and different approaches. And several of them have a stepped or a matrix level to deal with that problem. So last year, the relief given ranged from $540 to about $4,850. Wow. Whereas, that person who didn't qualify, who may have been fairly close, got zero. So that's a big difference. So problem two, our net worth limitation is actually high compared to all those counties that I looked at. We're the outlier with $250,000 net worth. $200,000 was the top of the other counties. It almost seemed like an outlier in itself. But I understand, out here in this area, it's rural. People have more land in general. Your average parcel has more acres. So maybe that was the consideration of the board in place when they made that level. I don't know. But one way, well, I'm jumping ahead of myself. So our limit, 250. The average of other counties is about 115. And the range went from 65,000 to 200,000 for that net worth threshold. So a more equitable program would set a maximum relief based on an average tax bill, based on the average home with, and what I based my figure on was parcels 20 acres and less with homes valued at $1 million or less. And the average tax bill of that whole group was about $2,300. So that person in that per scenario, even if they got help, they would have gotten just, $2,300 instead of the almost twice that. Lower the net worth limit to 200,000, but increase the number of acres excluded from that calculation. That helps people with the bigger parcels, at least somewhat. And other counties that do this go up to 10 acres. Right now, we exclude 5 acres from that calculation. If you exclude 5 more acres, it would allow people whose value is in their land at least a little more leeway. So the slide 9 is just kind of my stab at a matrix. Based on some of the others that I looked at, I think this would need some review, but I think it's honing in on where we should be as far as making it more equitable and getting away from that all or nothing aspect of it. So the last part there, the administrative adjustments, more to just, right now our deadline is July 1st, which puts it, kind of after a lot of processes. Most counties have the deadline is, sometime in March, April 1st, somewhere around there. I would suggest we continue with that. That said, right up to tax day, if somebody comes to me who totally qualifies and for some reason didn't know about the program, I will review their information, and if they qualify, I grant them the relief. The point of the deadline is for those people who are already in the system those people we already deal with to try to get all that paperwork in place. The statements all come in January to these folks, you know, so the sooner we capture that data, the better. So then the other thing I haven't brought up yet is the deferral option. Right now, you can have up to $350,000 worth of assets, and your taxes can be deferred to the sale of the property or your death. We have never had anybody take us up on it, thankfully, because frankly, we're not exactly sure how it would be accounted for. But there's none of the other counties that I looked at had anything even close to that. The only one that had a deferral, that was their only option. And it was a very modest amount. They didn't, you know, it's no huge award. So I found that interesting. So the last page is my points. A maximum award and the deferral option, lower the net worth limit, matrix for tax relief, and a deadline of April 1st. So thank you for listening, and thank you for asking for my thoughts.
Mary, thanks a lot. And I want to take this opportunity to say, for the public's sake, that between you and our county treasurer, we have two really great analytical people at the helm. And I mean, we all benefit from that. And you've helped me immensely in recent days and weeks. And the analysis that you put together, that the treasurer puts together, obviously with the help of your teams, it's just really impressive. And I think I speak for a lot of people in saying we're grateful for your service. My one question on your presentation is measuring net worth. Is this basically a trust and not verify scenario where people
I have a list of things and they report them to me. Almost everything our offices do, because we're small, is there's a certain amount of honor system.
Right.
But I go down the list, you know, do you have this kind of an account? Okay, I need to see the statement. Do you have life insurance with a value? Okay, you need a statement from your life insurance company.
So it's not just, oh, here's my net worth
Oh,
and
no,
there's
no,
no fault, but
we
you're
fill out
definitely
all the
verifying
numbers,
it.
yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely.
And then can you explain the deferral option? It sounds like you're recommending we do away with it, but I'm just curious how it works.
Right now, so that net worth goes up to $350,000. If you meet the household income level, then you can get a deferral of all your taxes until the property is sold or you die.
It's kind of like having a lien on the property.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, exactly, it's a lien. And with the deferral, you give up your right to privacy with this, because there's information out there related to the lien, basically.
So is that, and I'm sorry I'm slow on the uptake here, the relief program, is it basically relief in a tax year versus a deferral option? Are they running?
Yeah, it's I mean, I forget how the state code.
But you basically can opt to not pay, if you fall below the income threshold under the current rules, you don't have to pay your property taxes. Or you can just accept a deferral in perpetuity as long as you meet the requirements. Is that, I'm just trying to understand how the.
No. This application is every year.
Okay.
There's no option for deferral for people who qualify for the exemption. I'm not sure why they would want to put it off if they're getting granted.
Right, that's, yeah.
It's a higher net worth, right?
Yeah, it's just the higher net
I got
worth. It gives, I mean, that's their way of expanding the program before, which, to me, it's expanding it the wrong direction.
I understand.
So, any other questions?
Thank you very much for this. This is very interesting information. I have one question for you.
Yes, sir.
Which is that, do you feel as though right now, perhaps you're turning away folks that are, in the first slide, you have those two examples. People who look like they should be getting this are being turned away?
I've had to turn down a couple of people who are not much over, and it's heartbreaking, believe me. I mean, what it does is it makes me try to find some reason why I can help them.
Right.
and, because I'd like to help them. But I am very much, I follow the rules. Meanwhile, I'm signing off okays to give somebody tax relief on a $650,000 house, and that,
Right, well, this makes total sense to me, because the idea is that we're trying to help folks who need help,
right.
and that this matrix sort of system would address that way better than this
Yeah,
other blunt
I would hope so.
object.
I'm sure there's gonna be issues. I don't think anything is perfect,
Right.
but you just try to make it better.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah, and then, before I go.
It's logistically, just if the board would want to move forward on that, you're changing the ordinance, which is on the book, it's in chapter 151. And that would be a process to go forward through the upcoming months. Obviously, you would not be able to change it to April, the first go-round, because
Right,
you
obviously.
couldn't possibly do that. But you could walk it in, some way with some introductory language that had the changes this year, having the
And the
deadline
changes next
later,
year.
but in subsequent years, it's April 1 or April 15th, or whenever the board thought it was appropriate. But that would be the whole cycle of public hearing to amend an ordinance.
Do you think you and Mr. Goff could have this before the board at the May meeting for publication?
I'm sure we can. There are some, if you just wanted to take her recommendation and the chart, I'm sure we can put that in ordinance form. If you wanted to chew on it a little bit, then you might.
We could chew on a draft at least.
Yeah.
right?
We could chew on a draft of the Rules Committee, I guess,
Sure.
and maybe have that for the May meeting of the board.
The net worth limit's still pretty high compared to the average, right? Your proposed reduction.
Yeah, it is. Again, I don't want to pretend I have an idea why this board at the time set that high limit.
I was on
You
the
know.
board, and I don't remember, honestly.
Really don't, okay.
I think you end up with people who are house poor and through maybe it's handed down to them from another generation and now they're left with a home and property that's worth a lot.
Right,
But they might not have income to match it and they've got this burden of tax and so they have a couple options. They can sell it or break off chunks. And, the board certainly has been through land use and other, not wanting people to break off chunks of their property just to
Right.
be able to keep their.
so I didn't want to do too drastic a difference when I'm not exactly sure of the final ramifications,
When you calculate the net worth, do you take out the house and 5 acres to do
Yes,
that?
it is excluded already, yep.
Already.
Yep, and, yeah, my proposal would have the acres go up to 10. Now, I'm not proposing that we give tax relief on 10, still keep it at the 5, but you're allowed to exclude things from the calculations that you base the tax relief on.
The gate that you have to go through.
Right,
If
exactly.
it's a 10-acre lot, the other 5 acres aren't worth very much.
Well,
I mean, you got a house lot, and then you have additional acres.
Sure. Yeah, and the assessed values follows that. And the
Right.
way this ordinance is set up is several tests. So you
Right.
pass through these gates, can you keep passing through these gates? And if you get through the end, then you're good.
right.
So you have to keep passing these the various tests. Or one of the tests, I guess.
Mary, about how many people take advantage of the system as it's currently set up?
Last
and
year,
use it every
we-
year?
We had about, I think it's 79, my memory's not, I
74
told us, I
elderly
was
and
trying
5
to
disabled.
yeah, so
And it
79.
was about 130,000 or 120,000 in revenue, or,
121,000.
okay.
Okay, good, she's got those numbers. I don't memorize those
No, I
types of
was
things.
just trying to
Yeah.
remember for perspective,
Right.
what, if that sets any sort of expectation.
Now, and there's all kinds of reasons, as Gary alluded to, people who could qualify right now don't step up.
Right.
And a lot of it is not willing to share their personal information with me, even though it is confidential. And I want to assure, the public, it's confidential. Like all these figures that I'm putting before people are aggregate. They don't identify anyone. And other folks just don't trust the government.
Right.
They don't believe that they're going to get something for free. And they can't believe that. And I've heard that from from several sources. And, you know, no matter what I say, I can't convince them otherwise.
Well, and some people believe that they can pay and they want to pay.
Right,
Because they want to
exactly.
support their government.
Exactly.
So you never know what scenario
Right,
that you're going
exactly.
to encounter. My only concern with lowering it from 250 to 200 would be that we might not know if there's someone that's currently qualifying that perhaps that would negatively impact them and they may no longer qualify.
I did an analysis. I looked at people in the few people that were over.
I mean, that's a very small window, so I just would hate to take it away from anyone on the premise that we're expanding it and negatively impact someone.
No, I saw that somewhere.
So I was looking at.
So there may be a way in ordinance that you could protect people in the program.
Grandfather.
Grandfather them in.
That would be smart.
Well, except that I have to look at everybody every year.
Right.
Things change. You know, that person may have a windfall, may inherit a bunch of money or something like that. And if they're grandfathered, you know, I am not comfortable with that idea. I'd rather look at, so there were a total of 7 people over 200,000. Here's another little aspect of that. If they met the 250 number with assets only, I did not ask them their liabilities. I'm not going to delve into every financial bit of their life if I don't have to. So I stopped there. I don't know. Some of these people, their liabilities might have brought them down. The other thing is, if part of their assets included were other acres of their parcel, 5 of those, you know, if we adopt this plan, 5 of those acres, the value of that, which average parcel, 10,000 an acre, that would bring it down 50,000 right there. There's, some of these people may qualify with this, and I can look into it specifically if you would like to know.
That would be my only concern. I would hate to start cutting people out of a program that they currently qualify for.
Yeah. It sounds like it's maybe a small number, but still your point's well taken.
Yeah.
Maybe a grandfather provision.
Right,
And if there's some way to do that, and just as long as the grandfathering acknowledges that there may be other changes that.
Right, it sets their limit in perpetuity at the 250 rather than 200. Not that they would never be able, you know, to, if they did come into a windfall or something like you say, and it took them over 200, but say it even took them over 250.
Yeah, well, let me look at it first, because I'm not real comfortable with those kinds of carve-outs. I would rather look at it and say, well, I mean, honestly, maybe those people, they shouldn't have qualified. Who knows?
Okay. Well, I appreciate your looking at that.
I will look at it. Yeah. So my other thing. This is what I mentioned. It's about the late filing penalty for personal property.
Carrie, is this another ordinance change? Yes. Okay.
Is that in an ordinance?
I think so.
Okay, I honestly
Should be.
hadn't looked at that. Currently, as everybody is most likely aware, you get a blue form every year, and if you don't return it by May 1st or file, you have a 10% late filing penalty added to your tax. So I've been tracking the numbers of late filings since 2015, and it's consistent. Every year it's about 20% of the vehicle by vehicle, and about between 16 and 17% by value of vehicles every year. The revenue from that derived, it's about $46,000 is what Debbie Nick let me know. So that's pretty consistent. My personal feelings, I feel like it's a regressive tax. A lot of people get the penalty because they don't understand, or they thought they did the right thing because that's how they did it in the state they came from, or even the county in Virginia they came from. And there's confusion. They'll look at my form, which I try to make very clear that it's due, and they'll say, do I need to do anything with this? These are all common reaction, 20% common.
Yeah.
And it's also takes a huge amount of manpower this time of year. Basically, February, March, April, May, it's really the focus of my staff. And when you look at other counties around us, of the counties adjacent, all of them except Warren are what are called file by exception counties, where a person, a taxpayer, is required to report to us only if they have a change, if they've sold a vehicle, if they've got a new vehicle, if they moved a vehicle, things like that. So there'd be no annual blue form and no I can't talk. No late filing penalty. So right off the bat, you'd help about 20% of the taxpayers by taking this extra tax away from them. And my office, and besides not having the expense of the mailing and all the time and everything else, we could do a better job at things, other things we're tasked to, meals and lodging. We have never had the time or manpower to look into sales and use tax. What's the word? People doing what they're supposed to do.
Their submission.
That word.
Compliance.
Yeah, compliance, that word, I should know that word. And, other things like that. And I feel, and again, this is just me, it feels like a vindictive kind of tax, and I'm not comfortable with it.
How about, one thing we talked about a year or two ago was just, enforcement of land use taxation and making sure that people are doing what they should be doing to qualify for land use.
We do a good job with that, I think.
When would this, by freeing up time in these months of the year, would you also be able to do even more work on that front?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, all of the above, basically.
So the intent of the blue forms, and we didn't do this blue form and whatever color form process in my former community, and it seemed to work just fine. And DMV sends you the list of vehicles.
Right.
I guess you're matching those up against the blue form and trying to make your data more accurate before the bills go out.
Right.
That's the intent of the blue form.
Yeah, so changes, part of it is if somebody is claiming it as business on their taxes, they let us know, things like that. So I envision probably having more cleanup at bill time. People, when they get the bill, saying, oh, no, this is wrong, because they didn't bother to report to us like they're supposed to. But I feel like that kind of cleanup will be a more even stream of work instead of this 3-month solid kind of thing. Again, I don't know for a fact, but that's just, when I think about the processes, that's what it seems like it would be.
How much does it cost to send out the blue forms?
I don't know exactly. I could run some numbers.
I mean, because there would be revenue forgone, but I assume that revenue should be adjusted to account for the cost of doing this.
Yeah, I mean, bare minimum, the cost of postage and envelopes and paper and printing and that, I mean, my staff is all salaried, so
But still,
you wouldn't be able to equate that exactly, except that we'd be doing a better job at other things.
Yeah.
So,
So this is one that you will assuredly lose revenue, and you should have a plan for how you're going to backfill that revenue, based on Ms. Graham saying that her look back is that it's about the same every year. And so, you know, that $50,000 plus, I guess that includes the penalty and it's penalty now, and then whether they're a late filer or later for their taxes, it's totally separate. You still have that penalty.
yeah, that's a different one.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's pretty built in. So, thank you so much. I appreciate your
Thanks a
listening.
lot. Thanks again.
Thank you.
I want to thank you for the time that you
Absolutely.
spent with me the other day, and it's obvious to me that you care about the citizens of Rappahannock County, and I really appreciate that.
So things, I need to figure out the top level of
And that's 151-92 is the local code you're looking for.
Debbie, I'm just going to sneak out for a second. Don't vote on anything important.
Okay,
Thanks again.
Thank you so much, Mary.
thank you.
So, can't move on to the next agenda item.
Right?
Speaking of voting on something important, do need concurrence on what budget to advertise for public hearing.
And even given what we just heard, we could still, if the board chooses, move forward with what we have today, hear from our citizens, and then come back and talk.
Absolutely, and you could even, prompt them in different means to solicit input on those two factors that were just discussed. I don't know that I would do that in the formal public hearing notice, but you could do it through the local media to start that dialogue. And the one is really hard to calculate and necessarily would have to be a look back and kind of streamline things going forward. And the other, as Ms. Graham said, is a fairly predictable $50,000, and you had some conversations about various revenues that you could forecast higher. Who knows if those will come through, or you could find some other expense that you could reduce to reconcile that loss of revenue. But that, as you know, could all happen after the public hearing. If the board is of a mind to move forward with what's attached to board docs, I would just need a motion to authorize me to advertise those hearings, possibly when Mr. Whitson comes back.
We're stalling for time.
Make a motion that we advertise the proposed budget that's been advertised on board docs.
A motion, do I have a second?
I'll second.
A motion and a second, discussion?
I really do appreciate the time and effort that staff and the Commissioner of Revenue and the Treasurer put in to craft this budget, but I just can't support it with the additional revenue on personal property that we still show in the budget this year. So, and I just say that for the record. Certainly advertising, it's one thing, supporting the budget as a whole is another. And I do understand that we have to have something as a basis for conversation.
Mr. Whitson, we have a motion and a second with regards to presenting the budget, allowing Mr. Curry to notice it as it is today. Ms. Smith just spoke that she can't support it with the personal property taxes presented. Ms. Smith, is that correct?
I'm not talking about advertising. Certainly we have to have something to advertise. But the budget as a whole, I do feel like we have additional revenue that we should realize and or recognize as a possibility, and we discussed that in our last work session. I brought up those numbers, and I do think that there's cuts we can make on the expenditure side, and we should be dialing into those numbers.
Important to say that with the tax rate public hearing, after that is noticed, then you couldn't adopt a tax rate higher, but you could adopt tax rates lower.
That's correct.
So personal property, for example, would be advertised at 325 plus the fire levy. And so you could adopt at some number less than 325, bringing in less personal property revenue, which would have been offset, could be offset by some other revenue source that the board felt was appropriate.
Is the motion for the budget or also for the tax rates?
I heard both, but Mr. Frazier can clarify.
Right, for both that's advertised on Docs.
I was, I think the principle of equalization, has been out there a lot in our budget meetings, and certainly we're required to equalize the real property tax rate and not required to equalize personal property, but Mr. Curry provided a tax rate on personal property that I believe is equalized, and the one tax rate here that appears not to have been equalized because we're realizing approximately $193,000 in additional revenue is the real estate related portion of the fire levy tax. And so again, we can advertise higher and go lower. I think we ought to equalize that to be internally consistent and set that at 5 cents. But if we can still lower that after advertising, then I can support the motion.
We can lower anything after advertising.
Okay.
I do want to point out, given that point, this advertisement does suggest that you will adopt a 0 cents or dollars per 100 assessed value for the tangible personal property of one vehicle owned by a volunteer firefighter or auxiliary member. So you could not go above 0 if we advertise this.
Right.
I read from previous discussions that this is what you wanted to do based on the ordinance change, but
Yeah.
I want to make sure that's clear.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
So anyway, spoiler alert, I'm gonna push for 5 cents on the fire levy portion, real property portion of the fire levy tax. So,
Any further discussion?
roll call in this case?
Wouldn't hurt. I mean,
Yeah.
I need to know who voted what way, but usually that's easy to figure out.
Mr. Frazier?
Aye.
Ms. Smith?
Aye.
Mr. Whitson?
Aye.
Mr. Carney?
Aye.
And I also.
Thanks for getting that done during my break. That worked out. Very efficient.
All right. Moving into new business, everybody's okay. We'll go to the secondary 6-year plan preliminary discussion. Mr. Nesmith, thank you for
Or
being
Mr. Nesbitt.
Yeah, and Odalise is online as well, if we need her input. There's a rather lengthy narrative included in board docs and board members, perhaps even Mr. Carney, who wasn't with us last year when going through this process. Every year about this time, the board considers how to allocate your secondary road funds. Much of that funding is restricted for use on unpaved roads. There's a smaller portion that can be applied to other secondary type uses. So with respect to unpaved roads, each year, well, actually all projects, the board puts together a priority list of the order of projects that you would like to see completed. The current priority list, as adopted last year in May after public hearing, which is required by the Code of Virginia, includes the 2 sections of Kaiser Run Road. In between those 2 sections, the Holly Springs Road turn lane that the board adopted later after an amended document. Horton Hollow Road, which is extending from the Lizzie Mills side, the hard surface, pretty much the maximum length that you can do to meet the requirements, the width requirements of the road, and then Pullins Bluff Road. So after all those, after funds are allocated to those projects, the projected revenues that will be available to the county to allocate through the end of the 6-year period will leave about $766,000 on the tail end of the 6-year secondary plan. And so that means the board is in a position where you could add a project to the end of that priority list, and it would likely get done in 5 or 6 years when that funding tranche comes forward. I met with VDOT to discuss the various secondary roads in the county that might be eligible and that haven't come up in the last couple of years and were determined not to be appropriate. And over the last few years, there's several roads have come up and the citizens have spoken, basically told you they don't want their gravel roads hard surface. And there are some downsides. Speeds tend to increase when that happens and they lose some of the rural appeal. So the one road that seems most reasonable to add is Turkey Ridge Road, starting at the Culpeper line. Culpeper just finished their section of O'Bannon's Mill, which is the lead up to Turkey Ridge on that end. There are 2 sections of Turkey Ridge Road that the board could tackle heading down to the bridge at the turn, and that's about the end of improvements that the board can make. There are some other roads that appear to meet geometric and traffic volume requirements that are Swindler Hollow Road, Sycamore Ridge Road, and a couple sections that get Brown Hollow. Those have not really been vetted too much in the public, but they were referenced last year during public hearing in the ad, and you could see if the public has any interest. One of the things that has come up a few times over the last few years is how do you better inform the public that you're considering something like this? And there's been talk we should make a sign. And so we have placed an order for a series of these step-in signs that could be placed along these roads so that in addition to the public hearing notice, anybody driving along this gravel road would see this obnoxious yellow and black sign and pay attention and say, I better make a call.
Get a great response,
I thought we were banning
Gary.
temporary signs.
We don't have to follow our zoning ordinance, but, so,
Don't do as I do, do as I say.
yeah. Well, so the intent is to drive interest. After the public hearing notice ran the last few years in the newspaper, we did hear from a number of people saying, whoa,
Yep.
don't pave my road.
Shouldn't say questions, just say, are you bummed out about that? Call county administration.
Yeah. VDOT can do, I think, $600,000 or $700,000 of work in a project. So the 766 is about one project's worth to add to the end of the list. And the draft public hearing notice, which is pretty standard language and a lot of it's prescribed out of state code, lists here what the current list is, and then some roads that the board might consider adding to that list in yellow. And what I really need from the board is whether these roads are okay to include on the list, other roads you would like included on the list, or no roads.
Well, I can say that Turkey Ridge is in Stonewall Hawthorne, and I have talked to many, many folks who cite health and safety concerns. They're frustrated with the road. They're very thankful for VDOT having come and re-gravelled it a month ago, I think. But I've talked to a lot of folks that would love to see that road improved.
There's a section of Turkey Ridge in the middle, and I just received a pretty extensive report from VDOT where they did an exhaustive review of the road to see which sections would be appropriate for this program, and then the other sections, what maybe could be done. But the middle part between the bridge and I think where the last project ended on the other end aren't really eligible for this program. And so there's still going to be some concerns, and we have to continue to work with VDOT on maintenance in those areas. Where can we make spot improvements for safety and different things? You might be able to use safety funds or some other sources.
So it'd be from the bridge toward Castleton?
Towards
that way,
Mill.
not the other way?
Yeah.
Oh, no, it would be towards O'Bannon's Mill.
Yeah.
That's the one that could be improved?
Correct.
I see. Gotcha. Well, that would be an improvement.
The tracking chart that is attached is something that I've been putting together over the last few years as information has come in and as you've had this conversation. The current list of roads included on the bottom. And then on top, Turkey Ridge, I've highlighted green as the road sections that are probably easiest to do and have the most public support, I would guess. The middle section that are white, Swindler Hollow, Sycamore Ridge, and the 2 Get Brown are also, nobody has said don't do these, but I think is more likely that somebody might say that. And then the lower section of roads that are gray have, over the past years, been suggested that it would not be appropriate. And you have a representative here from North Pose Road who would strongly iterate that to you if you gave them a chance. The process is notice this public hearing, place these signs, and then at your May meeting, you would have that public hearing and you would hear from the public.
So the signs are only going on the roads that are up for
That was a question I had for the board. A few years ago, Battle Run Road was on the list and came off the list because people saw the notice and said, hey, wait, we don't want our road on there. After some previous groups had added. So that would argue that perhaps you should put signs on more. Kaiser Run is going to be worked on very soon, so I would not recommend signing that road because it's almost too late to take it off.
Right.
But so it would be kind of anything in the queue, but
Yeah.
not everything on it because frankly.
Horton
we don't
Hollow,
need
Pullens
signs
Bluff,
everywhere.
you adopted the resolutions earlier today authorizing the rural rustic program. And then any of those in the yellow that you would add on to the tail end, we would try to put signs up there.
Okay. May I ask a question, Mr. Nesbitt? Okay.
He's here.
So we already talked about this before the meeting, but just for the record, Long Mountain Road, kind of perennial problems, and recently it was really in bad shape after grading, but without material being added. And my question there, we had requested that you all do a traffic count on it. I guess it's the section, primarily the section from Rock Mills going up to Ridgeview, which to me seems to be the most problematic area because it's pretty hilly. So my question is, the results of that traffic count, does it put us in a position where that could be added here so the public would at least be on notice that it's under consideration for hard surfacing? And then my second question, if the answer to that is it cannot be, either because of traffic count or some other variable, what other options do we have? Because I think you probably recognize as much as I do, because you're always taking the calls. It's never in good shape, and it's just an ongoing battle. And so I'm wondering what we can do about it.
Well, thank you. That initial section of Long Mountain Road, we did review it recently. Odalise visited a couple weeks ago, and it is less than the what we need to get a 16 to 18 foot. Typically, 18 foot is really what we want to try to get, and we can live with short sections of 16 feet. We need to have two-way traffic, and people, where you can get two-way traffic without people having to pull over and stop to allow people through. That's part of the rural rustic, one of the goals.
Okay.
And we're just not going to be able to achieve that without just, without, we wouldn't be able to afford that with our state forest work. And it just doesn't meet the criteria for the program.
Is it, so there are two criteria, it's 50 vehicles per day minimum, and
it needs to be able to be improved. It needs to be minimal improvement. Like this, we like to see a road that's 16 to 18 feet wide. So if we need to push it out, a foot or two on each side and get good drainage and a good crown, we can do that. But if it's 13, 14 feet, if it's less than that, then we have to do extensive work to re-slope banks and get out. Almost, some areas we'd have to get outside the easement.
Right.
And one of the requirements also is it needs to be done within the existing 30-foot easement.
okay, so the answer is no.
That particular section, yes.
The latest traffic count would allow it, but the geometry does not.
Yeah.
Thank you. I needed an engineer, two engineers to explain that to me. Okay. Second question. So what can we do?
Well, we would, maintenance paving sounds good, but we have to be careful where we do that. I'd like to do an analysis of how much we've been spending on that road from a maintenance perspective.
I'd be really interested in that
to
analysis.
see how that compares, and if because when you pave a road, if it's not safe, and you still have these curves and you have narrow widths, you can create unconsequented safety problems. People, speeds tend to increase, and so we have to be very careful where we do that.
So I know you know our county really well, but and I'm just wondering if you're familiar with, and Mr. Curry was the one who brought this to my attention. So past my house in Harris Hall, you go up to the apex of Harris Hollow where it's gravel, and then it goes to pavement, then it goes to gravel, then it goes to pavement. I've always wondered, what was the logic behind that? Mr. Curry explained to me that that was maintenance-related paving, and I assume that stemmed from some analysis like you're describing, which is what are our maintenance costs, and
Yeah,
would paving save money in the long run?
in years past, where we have locations that are just, constant problems where they have to, go back and do work,
Yeah.
very, very frequently, more than normal, then, that is something they've done in the past.
One of the benefits to the secondary road program and these, adding all these rural rustic sections is that each year you're cutting down the gravel lane miles that the grader has to go maintain after a problem, right? And so, once Kaiser Run Road is done, then the grader doesn't have to go up that road. And once Poland's Bluff is done, the grader really doesn't have to go up that road. And they can focus more on Long Mountain or wherever else after.
That's correct.
Yeah.
With Kaiser Run, I think you have the road is actually lower now than parts of the stream.
But in those places are where it's been maintenance paved and why there's two sections. Yeah.
All right, so you're gonna look at you're gonna do some maintenance cost-related analysis on that stretch, and then I guess we'll talk later.
Yes.
But you're telling me it can't be added?
No, it just doesn't meet the criteria for it.
Okay.
Would you mind if I asked briefly about the section of the road on Turkey Ridge that goes from, I think it's Castleton Mountain Road, maybe? Anyway, up to the bridge, and you said it's not eligible for, was it improvements at this time, or if you could just walk me through that?
That's the segment that Mr. Curry was referring to earlier that we looked at. And it's just, it's like 12 feet in a lot of areas, and the location of the stream next to it and the high banks, and there's a lot of rock in that area, large trees. It's just not a good candidate for.
So the big picture is, the board could work with VDOT through secondary road program to enhance any section of road up to current standards. You might have to buy right away. You might have to have a very expensive project. You could go in and look perhaps for revenue sharing funds and spend millions of dollars to make that 12-foot wide road into, something better. But for the rural rustic program, there are very specific requirements where if you're basically gonna pave in place this road, you're gonna do a little bit of fixing, but you're just gonna put a hard surface on a gravel road. That's much more restricted.
Gotcha.
And you can use these funds for that.
And is the hard surfacing actually paving in this case in these rural rustic roads, or is
It's, we use surface treatment, a double layer of surface treatment.
Got it.
Yeah.
South Pose is your most recent example to go drive to see what it's like.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
That's quite an improvement, by the way.
So, back to the beginning, I just need to know what the board would like me to put in the public hearing notice, and which of these roads shown in yellow you would like included or not included, and if you want another road included that is eligible.
I'll try to include another road.
Yeah. And then if you have a feeling on the signs, like don't do it, or put them up for all the yellow roads and a couple of others, or just the yellow roads, I would surely welcome that input too.
Is there a draft notice here? And
Yeah, that's it.
okay, and it reflects everything that's.
That reflects everything on our tracking table that is green or white.
Okay, I'll put forward a motion to authorize advertisement VDOT secondary 6-year plan for public hearing to reflect precisely the draft public hearing notice in our meeting packet.
I will second.
A motion and a second, any discussion?
I would just say, most of the additional options that are presented in yellow, besides Turkey Ridge, are in Piedmont District. And I haven't heard a lot of interest in paving them, especially Kid Brown Hollow. I if we have what seems like an interested party to be paved this year, I would prefer to hear from folks in that area personally. And plus, I think on the current list, Pullens Bluff and the Kaiser Run Road projects are all in Piedmont District. So I just would say that I'm very satisfied, and I think most people are satisfied with the projects currently, and I would not want to take on additional projects at this time.
One of the things you will hear probably is you make a paved loop, and then motorcycle traffic gets higher and noise
Correct.
and things like that.
Yeah.
I like the signage idea. I think we talked about that last year, and thank you for looking into that.
You can look at this a couple of different ways. You can notice it to include
Yes.
Get Brown, and then you can note it, take it off the list for a long
That's-
time.
Well, yes,
Or you can just
I have
wait
been
till next
there.
year.
This is not my first rodeo, and I suspect that we will hear things to that effect. Like Holland Road in particular
Yeah.
fell into that category, and understandably so.
Mark, do you know the the 0.55 miles extending from end of hard surface and Get Brown? Do you know where that is? Is there a map?
Yes.
Oh, I see it.
It's
But
not,
maybe
it's
some
not great.
Hampton as well.
Yeah, it's,
Back to
well,
that
Get Brown's
stretch.
half and half, yeah.
Yeah.
So, because I mean, I totally take your point, and oh, here it is, okay. Yeah, because I would like to hear from people for sure, and I think that the Harris Hollow one is like,
Okay.
well.
Got it.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I think it's certainly fine. We can advertise and
Yeah.
put signs up, but from my perspective, certainly Piedmont District is very well represented on the list already, and I think if there's an opportunity to do something in Stonewall Hawthorne, that would be a good benefit.
All right, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you.
Mark, thanks for hanging around so long.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Elise.
I did ask too, Mr. Nesbitt, at the beginning of the meeting, if it's not any trouble for the rest of the board, if Mr. Nesbitt could talk about the project in Sperryville in May and what for folks what to expect in May.
The paving.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, we have it's on our paving schedule. Right now, the schedule is for the contractor to mobilize on May 4th and begin milling operations. And then when they're completed with the milling operations, they'll come in and pave it, repave it, and then they'll come back and put pavement markings on after that. There may be a gap in time in between, depending on weather and, but the schedule right now shows it being completed, starting May 4th and being completed May 12th.
Okay, that sounds great. And we're going to avoid the special events that are planned for the spring like we had discussed.
Yes, they're supposed to, I know Sperry Fest is the 30th,
30th.
and so they'll be mobilizing the 4th.
That sounds great.
Unless Sperry Fest runs over several days.
I think it's only gone multiple days, a couple of times, but it's only the second year, so.
And then I know we had discussed, and it sounds like your engineers had confirmed that we can accommodate a 6-inch striping
Yes, we're
this
going to
time.
put down 6-inch.
That's great.
Stripe it, it'll hold up and we'll remark it every year.
And you're putting speed bumps right down the middle of the road from, no?
No, sir.
Okay, traffic circle.
Unless you want to put your name on that.
No, don't start any rumors.
The TAP GEA project through OIPI is underway, and that consultant will be in the area this week to inspect the Flint Hill and the Sperryville area to get an idea of some of these multimodal vehicles plus pedestrians. How do we keep them both moving safely? So that's moving ahead.
Sounds good. Thank you for talking about those details, Mark.
You're welcome.
Thank you for the
Thanks a lot.
drainage work that was done on
Okay.
522 by BB&T. That was a lot of work. I didn't know it was happening. The drainage that I showed you a picture of that covered 522 in Flint Hill, they did some major
Curb
work.
inlet has been
Yeah,
replaced.
yeah, I saw the curb replacement, yes.
Thank
Are
you.
you guys are okay with the Harris Hollow Beavers right now?
With the what? It's a work in progress.
I mean, it's a lot of work. I
Yeah.
mean, people have been working like beavers over there. But, I mean, it's pretty remarkable. The road is dry, and now I notice that the opposite side of the road is really wet. So, I mean, it's that problem's been fixed. Now I mean, it's unbelievable, that the beaver situation is not affecting the road thanks to the landowner's effort.
Yeah.
I just wonder, could we just maybe put up some sort of portable equipment and play the sound of running water in a dry area and see if they would go over there?
Bill Fletcher's all over that.
Yeah.
I mean, but I gotta thank you for working with the property owner because obviously it was very sensitive and for now, knock on wood, it's pretty remarkable. There's no
Yes.
water on the road.
Yeah.
All right, thanks, and to your local team, Mr. Jenkins and George Lee and everyone. They've been doing an awesome job on these one-off requests.
Yeah, they are very responsive. Appreciate that. I'll
Awesome.
pass that on to them.
Thank you.
Tree group got Old Mill Road done, so my shortcut to town is now safe again.
Now safe.
Thank you.
I just rode by there on the way here, and I noticed that.
I know there's some road cleanup happening on Hiddles Mill on the 22nd, which is Earth Day. So expect some trash bags around sometime soon.
We'll be glad to pick them up. Y'all, somebody picks up the trash, we'll pick up the bags.
We love having you here. We have so many questions. Keep coming.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks a lot.
Mr. Nesbitt.
Okay, you're welcome. Thank you.
Madam Chairman, might we have a brief recess?
Why? 2 have already gone. No, fine with that. 5-minute recess.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yep. Where are we back? Let's see, we're on the Chester Gap Volunteer Fire Department EMS program update.
As the board's aware, through budget proposal, I reached out to the county administrator in Warren County to discuss cost sharing going forward with the presumption that the board would move forward, although that remains to be seen. The agreement that was adopted by both Warren County and Rappahannock County last year are attached, and that document, if you were to look at the last paragraph, says it's finally agreed that the program shall be reviewed jointly by Chester Gap Volunteer Fire Department, Rappahannock County, and Warren County as part of the FY23 budget process. We're in the FY23 budget process. So in order for this program to continue beyond June 30th, the board would have to adopt a new agreement. This is only for FY22. As noted during the budget process, my negotiations, if you want to call them that, with Warren County was that the cost should be shared on a call volume basis and should include the cost for workers' compensation. The narrative for this item in board docs identifies that the current cost of services for the hourly part-time employees for the BLS provider and the ALS provider total $292,000 as part of the agreement. And then the workers' comp is estimated to be $11,700 or so through through VACORP. So that total of $303,692, if it's shared 60-40, would break down to the numbers you see on the screen: $182,000 for Warren County and $121,477 for Rappahannock. If you were following along with our budget conversations, I included $117,000 in the operations line for the fire service fund, because that's the personnel component, and the insurance portion would be in the insurance side. It would be all of it, but then it would balance out. So there are a couple forms of data available for you to look at call volume. This goes back several years to 2015 and shows you the relative proportion of calls for orange, which is Warren County, Rappahannock blue, and then Fauquier's at the top in gray. So you can see in the part year, 2022, it's been a little lower. The full year, 2021, is a little higher. If you just look at the data, for 2020, 2021, and the partial 2022, without Fauquier, because that's mutual aid, it's 60.2% and 39.8%, which is how I arrived at the 60-40 recommendation to the Warren County administrator, who told me I will put that in my budget. So with that said, if this program's going to move forward, a new agreement must be negotiated and adopted. And I'm not sure how the board wants to go about doing that part.
So we're not, the idea is just to talk this through today, but we're not under the gun to make any kind of decision right now, I assume, right? Or are we?
Well, the current agreement runs through June 30th.
Okay.
So arguably you have through June 30th to make that decision. The current budget that you will be considering, and the public will be considering, funds the program in, as shown, 60/40. So if ultimately the board in May decided not to continue on with this or continue in some other manner that was more costly or less costly, that could have ramifications on the budget.
Do we have any, in light of the whole call box prioritization of calls, work that has been done recently, do we have any anecdotal information regarding how far out into the county Chester Gap is going on Rappahannock County calls? If you were to disaggregate the Rappahannock County call total into areas of the county, what is being covered normally?
So for EMS calls, Chester Gap is being dispatched on anything up to Massey's Corner.
Okay.
That might change as the boxes are updated to reflect the current availability of EMS providers. And where Company 3, Company 1, and Company 9, where their first due is, that'll have to be analyzed by the chiefs. For fire, it wouldn't go that far.
I don't know if those figures are something that could be provided, but I'd be interested in a disaggregation of the Rappahannock County total, just to see their reach into the county, because obviously it's a not insignificant expense, even at 40%, and we want to make sure that it's a service offering that's benefiting a decent area of the county, which it sounds like it is, because that would include all of Flint Hill, probably areas of Fodder Stack, down Crest Hill, and all the way over to Massey's Corner. But it'd be interesting, I don't know if they could do location data, just high level.
There are a few enough calls that somebody could probably put their hands on each one. The boxes aren't in place yet, and so there's a distinction between which calls a company is alerted, and which calls they ultimately go to, because as Company 1 might get alerted, and then by the time somebody gets to that station from home to start running that call, the second due Company 9 might be alerted and be on the road, but then 1 is on the road as well, and 9 may not actually take the call.
Right.
And so that's the value in our diverse system. There are a lot of downsides, but there are a lot of upsides to having multiple companies.
Yep.
And if the board is interested, what I was thinking we could do based on the feedback from last year is have Mr. Curry and I approved by the board to have the conversation with Ed Daly, their county administrator, and Supervisor Cullors, their chairman, probably with Mr. Bonzano and Mr. Brown, Chief Brown, and just talk through this, come up with are there any changes, or is there information that the board would like that we could gather and then bring it all to the main meeting for a vote?
I think we want to bring it to a May meeting for discussion and then a vote.
Because of our deadline at the end of June, if that works for me as well.
Okay. Do you need a motion to have the okay to have that meeting?
Yep.
Okay, I'll put forward that motion.
A motion, do I have a second?
I'll second.
Discussion.
Motion and second, discussion?
There ought to be some parameters. I mean, if we're just authorizing someone to go talk and hammer out something, then we don't even know what we're actually agreeing to right now.
I guess I'll make my motion more specific to authorize the chair and our county administrator to meet with Chief Bolzano, Chief Brown, Chairman Cullors and the Warren County Administrator, whose name is escaping me at the
Mr.
moment,
Daly.
to review the fiscal year, I believe it's a fiscal year 2022 agreement, and to discuss what, if any, changes need to be made to that agreement, considering it was the first year, and for our board chair, Mr. Curry, to return to our board with a list of any proposed changes to the existing agreement, aside from the 60-40 split that's currently on the table. So hopefully that's, is that?
I think that we were talking about like a pro rata share. I mean, 60-40 may be what they're happy with because it may be more advantageous for them. I think it needs to be some sort of, in order for it to be beneficial, it should be beneficial for both sides, but it should be clear that we want to make sure that we're not paying for something we're not getting.
I'll remove the 60-40 and just say that you'll review the agreement, any possible changes, including the cost sharing arrangement, and we'll return with a report on what changes are proposed after your discussion. Does that work?
Mr. Carney, that was an amended motion. Do you second that one?
I do.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion?
I just would add that, you know, based on our discussions in the budget workshop, it sounds like with paying 50-50 last year, we probably overpaid by about $15,000. And I really think that we should try to, you know, get a credit for those dollars that we put into the program and apply it to this year. And we should look at the year that the agreement was first, or that the program was first put into place in 2020, and see if maybe there's some funds we can't recoup from that year as well.
So, I mean, I think that,
I understand that that can be implicit in the motion as it stands, but those are just issues that I wanted to continue to bring up.
Discussion guidelines or points of discussion.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Thank you. All right, permitting authority for special use permits.
Madam Chair, I asked to have this added to the agenda, and this is a continuation of the very brief discussion we had at our last meeting, maybe during our open forum portion of our meeting. Two BZA members were just asking me what this was all about, and so I was tested on explaining it in a concise way, so I'll just try again. I've been on the board now for 2 years, and before I joined the board, I always had a question in my mind: what is the difference between a special use and a special exception permit? And if you ask 5 different people that question, you sometimes get 5 different answers. And it has occurred to me that most, if not all, of the permit applications that come to the Planning Commission and either come to the Board of Supervisors by way of a special exception permit path or go to the Board of Zoning Appeals by the special use permit path, all are fundamental zoning related decisions that could have broad implications for our county and how it looks, feels, and changes over time. Setting aside all of the tourist home applications, I know Ms. Smith and I have gone back and forth on how tourist home applications could be handled, and I think you kind of changed your mind on that, so yeah.
With the permitting issues that we currently have, I would
Right.
hesitate to shifting any more processes to
Yeah.
a stroke of the pen, so to speak.
Right, so I wanted to at least continue this discussion because it's occurred to me, serving on the Planning Commission, that there are a lot of inefficiencies that I don't think serve our citizens well. One of those inefficiencies, unrelated to this agenda item at the Planning Commission, is we have this preliminary review process, which is basically a checking of the completeness of a file related to an application. And the preliminary review can then lead to the scheduling of a public hearing at the Planning Commission, and then depending on what type of permit it is, a hearing at the Board of Supervisors or at the Board of Zoning Appeals. And one thing that we're going to look at with the Berkeley Group consultants is how to streamline that process at the Planning Commission. But related to that is how to streamline the overall permitting process for our citizens. And I wasn't around the last time this came up, but I believe that the ultimate decision was not to change this bifurcated permitting system because of the potential increased workload on the Board of Supervisors. And so it's a question of balancing that with providing efficiency and clarity to our citizens. And many citizens, and I don't blame them, don't really understand when they're at the planning commission where they're going next. And I always try to explain, okay, this is a special use permit and therefore you're going to the Board of Zoning Appeals next. Okay, this is a special exception permit, like 2 primitive campsites on a farm winery, you're going to the Board of Supervisors. So in the spirit of improving efficiency and providing our citizens with a better overall experience, but still enforcing vigorously our zoning ordinance, I just wonder if we shouldn't revisit the idea of an ordinance amendment that would basically have all permits be special exceptions that go from the Planning Commission to the Board of Supervisors, and eliminate special permits or special use permits, SP as they're called in 170-36, and the Board of Zoning Appeals in that case would play, I think, what would be a more traditional role of serving as a body that handles appeals of zoning decisions or concerning variances. And so I was just curious to get everyone's current thinking on this. I know Mr. Goff mentioned the last time we brought this up that you got somewhere on this last time it came up and then it died. So
If I could, I was on the board when all that transpired, and there's really only a couple of ways that you can speed up the process or make efficiencies, if you will, using your terminology, and that's either have more board meetings or board action on these items, or you have to have an administrative action on some of them.
Right.
Or a combination of both. There's really, before we start down this process again, we've got to come to grips that there's only really 2 ways to do that. You either make them by right or administrative uses, or you have more meetings of the Board of Supervisors, or longer meetings. It's really one or the other. There's really no in between. And the BZA traditionally took on, because I wondered about that before myself many years ago, and it was explained to me whether it was correct or not at that time, and whether it's still correct now, if it was then, is that the BZA special permit process is for something that's more localized rather than something that has a county-wide impact.
Yeah.
So a special exception, for instance, we could bring in, maybe put a factory somewhere, probably up Harris Hollow Road or something, and that would be maybe beneficial or detrimental to everybody in the county, whereas something as controversial as a tourist home on the same road may not be.
Yeah. The one that many of these applications kind of get me thinking about this system. Mr. Curry has the use table pulled up. So interesting, young man comes in for a permit for 2 primitive campsites on a farm winery and comes to the Board of Supervisors. A pastor of a Baptist church in Chester Gap wants to have outdoor services 6 times a year on a 25-acre lot. And that, just in terms of potential effect on neighboring properties, arguably would be a bigger deal than 2 campsites on a big farm winery, but yet that decision goes to the Board of Zoning Appeals, and Ms. Donahue, representing the Chester Gap area, has no input on the decision. And so, you'll all kill me for saying this, but I'd be willing to meet more often. I don't know if future board members would want to meet more often, but I'd be willing to meet more often if we could just streamline this whole process and have the BZA play a more limited and focused role as I've described.
I have a solution.
Oh, okay. I should have let you speak first.
Oh, that's okay. I don't mean to interrupt, but that's all right.
Yes.
I've just been looking at this for a couple of years now. And I made up just a little tiny list just this morning. And I'm looking at are 17036 residential units. Single-family dwelling, and conservation is permitted, ag is permitted. In RR5 it's permitted, R2 is permitted, and rural village is permitted. Commercial village, you need an SP. Why? In commercial general, you need an SP. And in HC, you need an SP, industrial an SP, and the mobile home site, of course, which is never anything relevant anymore. So my suggestion is that you empower staff to go through and flag the issues where it may be more efficient, since we're talking about a single-family dwelling unit and all these things. Why wouldn't that be an administrative permit? Why does any board need to visit it unless it's denied by the zoning administrator, and then they have the right to appeal?
Yeah.
You go on down to the very next one, a dwelling attached to family duplex, SP, 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 then permitted, permitted, and then, curiously, SP, SP, and SP. So Mr. Curry and I have had several discussions over the years, and I know I did with Mr. Dameron, his predecessor in interest, and we think that a lot of this can be eliminated by shifting it to the zoning administrator's purview. I can't understand why the Board of Supervisors would want to take on the work of listening to a special exception with a public hearing on a single-family dwelling in commercial village.
Or you just don't allow certain things.
Or, that's the other issue, is go through and say, well, is this really appropriate at all? That's more of a heavy political lift, I would submit. Whereas it's much easier to eliminate the SUP before the BZA and simplify the process by not cluttering up this chart with as many applications as possible. Now, there's some where obviously the board's going to want to be involved. And I'm thinking that there's all this stuff in here that's somewhat, I don't know, internally inconsistent, maybe is too strong a phrase, but more than one dwelling on a lot or a parcel. SE, 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 and then all of a sudden it switches over to SP, 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 SP. Why? And as Mr. Fraser pointed out, back in the day, I think there was kind of an arbitrary fixation of these categories to what academically on paper may have appeared in 1966 as, well, that makes sense.
This ordinance is from Fauquier 1984.
This is the 84. Yeah, and it's Fairfax in 1966 when this was.
And it was London in 1742.
Dr. Chandler knows.
Where was it in the Code of Hammurabi?
Yeah, it was Mesopotamia in 886 AD.
So if you go through and you look all the way to the end of this.
No subdivided
where you go into 137, I've got little red dots, I've got question marks, I got all this stuff. I think it would take Mr. Curry and I probably about a half a day or maybe a day to go through and to flag the ones. He's supposed to be the big zoning guru now. That's the whole point of the second in command there, right? So we go through and I can do the bulk of the lifting and he can help me with the getting it on the paper in the right format. But I think that you could do a lot to simplify and streamline by doing an in-depth analysis of staff bringing to you, hey, why do we have this here? What is the real reason?
It's a great
for it. It just means it's like the green eye shade stuff that I've got to do as to which of these makes any sense at all.
Okay.
Because some of them flat out don't. Like, why do you even want to have a single family dwelling in an industrial zone? Anywhere else, that normally doesn't happen. So then, that's a legislative decision for the board as to whether or not you even want to allow that, especially given our industrial zone here in this county, which is,
It's very old.
it's very old.
Isn't there a home there now?
Is there a home there? There's the glass workshop. That's about all I think. And is the violin museum? Or
No.
They're actually at commercial village.
So are you all, would you be willing to let him at least take a crack at
Well,
that?
I was
It's a good
thinking
shortcut.
If we could maybe set up some kind of a work session sometime and maybe review what you come up with after the budget adoption sometime, off in the near future, not too far away, but, get a few things off our plate, maybe we could do that.
Yeah, I was thinking that as far as a realistic time frame, if it would work for the board and Mr. Curry, I was thinking maybe the July meeting might be a good one, because that's
That gets us
sort of
past the
old
budget.
ones, you know, not much going on, we could, you know, really tackle something as large as this, where there probably would be a considerable amount of public input.
Yeah, Art, thanks a lot. I mean, I feel bad opening a can of worms, but it's spring and fishing is back. So, do you need a motion?
I would like a motion, I really would,
So it would make our task more clear.
The motion would be somewhere along the lines of to authorize staff to engage in a comprehensive review of
17036.
of 17336 as to the proper categorization of SPs versus administrative action and, well, special permits generally meaning both SEs and SPs.
Okay.
Because the two terms are interchangeable. And then to report to the board our findings and recommendations so that the board then can have a work session to consider proposed amendments and to schedule a public hearing.
Okay, I'll put forward a motion that we authorize staff to do a comprehensive, detailed review of the use table, which is codified under 170-36 of the Rappahannock County zoning ordinance, to review the accuracy and logic of the special permit designations in various zoning districts and for different uses, and return to the Board of Supervisors with draft recommended changes, which will then lead to a subsequent work session.
And one last thing, if I may, just to be clear, I've also done this work about 5 years ago where I went through and systematically eliminated the SUP before the Board of Zoning Appeals. Should that be presented again in addition to substitution? What should?
So you already have that work product?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it needs a little tweaking since, but it's pretty much done.
I'd like to see that. Yeah, I'd like to see that again.
All that.
Yeah, so to extend the motion, we would also like to review your prior work product on a review of the special use permits that were going, or have historically gone before the Board of Zoning Appeals. And
As in that old work entirely eliminated the SUP and the legislative function of the BZA entirely. And it was relegated to an appellate role, which we argued at the time was more appropriate since they were not answerable to the voters. They're appointees, and therefore they shouldn't have a legislative function.
thank you. That's super important. Yep. I'd like to see that too.
Is the motion clear?
Absolutely.
As much, yeah. Do I have a second?
431.
I'll second.
Have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed?
I wasn't about to ask him to say that again.
Well, I almost borrowed your line and said, Mr. Goff, would you repeat that? But I didn't want to do that.
And this for tape
Thanks for
recorders.
crafting the motion, Art.
Yep, thank you. All right, information reports and correspondence. On to board committee reports.
Board committee, I believe the first one is the building committee. We met and we had a pretty good discussion with, of course, each other, but with Mr. Randy Vaughn from Wiley Wilson as to the direction that the board had given the building committee, and we're still unclear how much further we should go with the new building project. We are working on going forward with the sheriff's office.
That's awesome.
And the at least the exterior or the envelope of the courthouse building. But we spent a lot of time on new versus renovation, and it comes down to this. And I think that we all, sometimes we all cannot see the forest for the trees. And if you go back to the initial report that was done by Wiley Wilson, and that has been subsequently, verified by Mr. Curry and members of the building committee, we have a deficit of office space of, I think, I'll just throw a number out there, I believe it's 16,000 square foot. And we either need that much more space, or we're renting some of that space now. And that is, to me, a very bad situation, because we have basically less than, standard for the type of offices that they are in. And we've all seen those reports. So we either have to build a new administration building or some smaller building somewhere in the county, or we need the larger courthouse building and renovate this for administration staff and board meetings. So that's where we really are. And we can come back with and we plan to come back with a more detailed presentation to the board. But I'd just like to put that out there, that's what we're really looking at. It's not a fix the courthouse and the dependencies up and walk away from it. We're really looking at a new building somewhere. And so be prepared for, a little bit of a study brought back to you on exactly what that involves.
Okay.
So it's not a either or, it is. So, it is a new building somewhere. Exactly what we put in that new building and how we go about it is what we're looking at.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for that.
Recreation Facilities Authority.
So we had, we went over the fodder stack, which is coming along.
Yeah.
Rapid Home is bringing out an ice cream truck, which we approved, which would be great for the seniors, Rapid Home deals with. And, yeah, the fence is coming along, which is great. The second phase, privacy fence, and taking some trees down. Would this be a good time to talk to the Rappahannock River Basin Commission? Or?
Sure.
Just briefly, the Secretary of Agriculture was there, which was fantastic, just kind of putting forth some policies that the governor is going to focus on, sort of that will affect the watershed. Lots of sort of activity towards private and public nurseries to help with replanting trees along watersheds and along the shoreline, and a concentration on carbon sequestration and no-till and cover cropping, and working those programs with the farmers, which I thought was fantastic. They're really going to push that. That's about it.
Excellent. Public Safety Committee did not meet. Rules Committee did not meet.
Did not meet.
Planning Commission update.
Sure. We met on March 16th, and there are two tourist home applications. One for a little building down here on the fodder stack just outside of town, and then another one on the site of Narmada Winery, and both those were sent on to the Board of Zoning Appeals. And then finally, I mentioned in the earlier discussion, Chester Gap Baptist Church came in and asked for, is seeking a special use permit for, under the place of worship activity field provision of zoning ordinance, or the definition of the zoning ordinance. Pretty large parcel, and they flatten an area in the middle, and they want to have, I think, 6 to 8 church services or similar events there per year. And we went ahead, and I didn't support it, but a majority of the planning commission voted to schedule a public hearing. So that'll be happening at our next regular meeting.
I'll interject real quick. We found deep buried in the file that they actually received an SUP long ago for a new church on that site. It's expired, but it's interesting that at that time they made it through the gauntlet for a new building, and now thinking about using a field.
And then just, I guess, breaking news, we're going to have a work session this Wednesday to dive back into the draft sign ordinance amendment, and thank you to Mr. Goff and Mr. Curry for their work to date on that. So that's what I have from the Planning Commission.
Thank you. And I think we have the fire levy board. You didn't have a meeting about it. Okay. All right. Any of the reports, Mr. Curry, you want to go through the cash or anything?
Nope. Treasury reports look good.
It does.
Building permit report shows a lot of activity, if you haven't looked at that. It's always good to put a pulse on that. 4,748,000 estimated value in 4 dwellings. So somebody's building one person's building something really big, maybe 3 people building something small, or some fraction, that's an average, I would say. I thought that was very interesting. But that, at the end of the day, those building permits turn into the properties being valued according to the tables that were created during this reassessment cycle. So whether it happens now or 4 years from now, the new construction will be valued to these tables. And that's the level playing field.
Thank you. Go into matters presented by the board. Mr. Frazier?
I don't know, I feel like we'll have quite a discussion tonight over the fireworks, so.
Fireworks over the fireworks.
Quite a bit of discussion about that going on in Jackson District here recently, so we'll see if there's any fireworks tonight.
Ms. Smith?
I just wanted to circle back, please, to the water monitoring discussion. And so it sounds like we have an opportunity for a well monitoring location here in the county, which is great and very serendipitous timing that that's apparently opened up. We still have another water monitoring station opportunity coming up, if I remember correctly, for a stream.
There were a couple through the RCBA that, and I think Mr. Carney said it best, that for whatever reason, there's a lot of bureaucracy in trying to get that program off the ground. But there were 2 or 3 that, one on the Rappahannock River that straddled us and Fauquier, and one towards Madison, one in the middle, and it's hard to get them going. I don't know why.
Okay, so they're sort of in pending status,
Yeah.
for lack of any other
I think
better
ultimately
way
it's
to
who's
put
going to
it.
pay for what, and they can't move off of that.
And they're
That's
short-staffed, we just talked about this.
Right, and so, COVID, and people aren't really in the
Yeah.
office and all of the usual things. So, and then the other thing, again, which Mr. Fletcher brought back, which I know we had touched on before, is what sort of data can the county receive through the health department or other agencies to monitor this as well?
Every well, when it's made, there is a well completion report. Those are done, they're required, and health department has them, and they're usually available electronically. What we don't necessarily have is some way to catalog them and analyze what it might mean. So a well is put in, and the well driller is supposed to indicate that they hit water for the first time at 80 feet. Okay, and that goes on to the completion report, and then at the end of the project, they will provide a safe yield from that well. And so those are on this piece of paper. And we talked to, Ms. Donahue and I talked about this with Mr. Day and White, and they thought it's going to be a whole lot of data, and some others have tried to track a whole lot of data, but at the end of the day, you have a whole lot of data, and it's hard to do anything with it. And other localities just stopped. So I think what he entered the discussion with, what is it that you want to try to figure out, and then maybe we can start driving towards finding what data is out there to do that. There was a thought, and we talked about it, can we take this data that's on these well completion reports and put them into a GIS and learn something? And it's a snapshot in time from when that well was put in, and as you heard for the hydrogeology discussion, it's really proximal to that spot.
Right, and it's different
And so
times
what
as
fracture,
to other
different,
wells.
so it's,
Yeah,
does
compare.
any of that
Draw it,
mean
for
anything
instance.
when you draw it together?
Yeah.
And the big difference between what he's talking about and putting in this long-term USGS monitoring well is that, as he said, you get the period of record, 60 years for some well. That really helps you look over time and draw some conclusions over time. You can compare that to how much rain happened in a given year, the temperatures, or this or that. And you have holes all over the county of wells. You just don't have that 60 years of data.
Yeah.
And that's the real value. If you can find somewhere, you can draw some inferences between what the groundwater is doing to what the environment has been doing over that same time.
And our
And if you
surrounding
link that
neighbors.
again to surface water, if it hasn't rained in 60 days and there's still water in the stream, probably coming from groundwater. So you begin to match those base flows and maybe draw some conclusions. At the end of the day, none of it matters unless you use it to inform your ordinances that you have control over. And that might be subdivision and zoning, which are already pretty strict. I mean, if you compare our locality to anybody around us, what levers are you going to pull in an ordinance that you don't have now? And it might be mandatory groundwater characterization study for anything that's an SE, or only SE if we go down a certain path, right? If you want to do this, you must do this study, period. Any use, unless you're not using water. Those sort of things you need to think about. At the end of the pipe, what is it that you can do to affect change? And then can we collect data to help you decide which levers to put in the ordinance?
I think they.
What the guy said to me downstairs was that they thought it would be helpful to know how deep the wells were when they were dug and the coordinates of them. The gentleman from DEQ said, that actually would be useful information to what he does. And I said, well, that comes from the health department.
Yeah.
He says, well, the problem is half the time the things aren't complete. They'll leave them blank. So I said, well, the only thing I can suggest is that maybe as a contingency of the issuance of an occupancy permit for new construction, is that the building administrator would confirm that there's a completed GV2 or whatever form that is. GW2. And he said, yeah, that would be helpful.
No CO without that.
Or maybe, but along those same lines, I talked to Medj about this 2 or 3 years ago, or no longer than that, probably 15 years ago initially, but no, I bought a property up in West Virginia when my mom was living, and of course it had a well and septic, but we didn't know anything about it, so I go over to the local health department, and they could find, which was older, but they could find the septic permit, and so we knew where the lines were, what it consisted of, and who installed it and when. But she had nothing on the well, which we thought was newer. And so the gal that was, had Medj's type of position over there, she was originally from West Virginia, but she had lived a long time in Virginia Beach area, came back home, so to speak, and she said, "Did you look at the well cap?" And I said, I mean, it's got one on it. What am I looking for? Well, underneath of it is stamped all the information that was relevant. The well driller, the date, the rate of flow, the depth, all of that. Right there. She didn't have it in her office. It wasn't completed. But we had the information, and I could call the well driller and verify. And so I asked Medj, does Virginia have anything like that to require a well driller to put that information on? And she said not to her knowledge. I don't know if we need a local ordinance for that.
Or we can't. A lot of times the well drillers will put their contact information as just a advertising.
If for follow-up, maybe to pull a bad pump or something, right? But this gave us all the information that I needed. It gave me, gallons per minute, the date, the depth, all of that.
It's pretty efficient.
They did tell us, I think it was Albemarle and Loudon, both for years monitored and kept track and all that other stuff, and just decided they were going to stop because they weren't doing anything with the data. So that's where we've got to decide what we want to do if we get.
Well, I understand that. I mean, we should be doing that with everything that we work on, what's our end goal. But I mean, obviously, if you collect data for a while and then you stop collecting data because you hadn't been doing anything with it, then the next thing you're looking at is you're not going to be able to do anything in the future because you don't have the current data.
Yeah. You can data yourself to whatever, yeah.
I mean, it does sound like it would be interesting to tie the completed form for the well, though, to the occupation permit.
Right, because I don't think we can tell the health department what to do, but we certainly can tell the building inspector.
Yeah, I did contact DEQ and ask them if we could force people to log their information into that state database, and they found out, well, we didn't see anything that says you could or that you couldn't.
Didn't help much.
That doesn't help much, and so you'd be out on the tip of the spear, and then the problem is you put that in your ordinance, and what if they don't do it? What's the enforcement mechanism? So unless you know that you have the authority to do it, and it's going to be a misdemeanor or something to force it.
That's what my thought was, before we told the occupants.
If we're allowed to do that.
We had to drill a public well up at the brewery, and they were required to give the, I think, what is it, GW2, is that what it's called? To the Office of Drinking Water, and they just never did. Like, it was just pulling teeth. It was like a piece of paper that they just seemingly don't fill out.
Wow.
It said it took forever, and to be honest with you, I don't even know if they got it, but, yeah.
But Medj might have got it.
Yep.
Rather than ODW.
Possibly.
In Richmond.
Ms. Smith, anything else?
That's it, thank you.
Mr. Whitson?
Nope.
Mr. Beam?
I wanted to ask the board how, because I've had a lot of constituents ask me if we've had any formal interaction with the folks behind the Clevenger's Corner development. And I've said no, and I wanted to kind of gauge your feelings on how you all would feel. I mean, is that something we should think about a little bit in terms of maybe just a simple presentation? Or, you know, well, I know that the traffic's going to affect us. You know, Mr. Fletcher brought up today, maybe the water table will affect us. The lights will definitely affect us. I just wanted to gauge your thoughts on it, if it's something that anybody would be interested in terms of sending them a letter and saying, hey, we'd love to hear what you guys are doing. Just an informational thing? Or?
Would it be with the developer or with the county or both?
Yeah, it could be both. I mean, I would imagine that a developer is going to give you a more interesting presentation, possibly in terms of.
Yeah,
scope.
I
don't know.
I've had people ask me that too. It seems like we should at least kind of understand timing and things like lighting and
scope.
Yeah.
I think perhaps we should contact the either zoning administrator or director of planning down there, because I don't know what business our Rappahannock County would be doing with a private developer in Culpeper County.
And Culpeper County will have, during the various phases, but they'll have site plans for the project that should include transportation impacts and any transportation studies that were needed. And then they have some lighting ordinances, so it probably speaks to that.
I think it's a great idea.
I brought it up to the Rappahannock Rapidan folks because I wanted to see, and there's the one side of the coin is you're not going to be able to change anything. The other side of the coin is I think we ought to know what's happening in our backyard. So
I would highly doubt groundwater will be impacted here from anything that happens there. Lighting, if it's really egregious, could certainly affect us.
Yep.
Transportation, a divided highway can handle a lot of cars, and it all has a lot to do with that intersection.
Yep.
You know, VDOT had a plan to 6-lane to 11.
That's insane.
Wow.
I mean, it's real.
Wow.
What?
VDOT was going to 6-lane to 11. I mean, that's part of their plan. They were going to 4-lane 522. And Mike Massey was on the planning commission at that time, on the board of supervisors as well, but he was the board's rep to the planning commission. And I was out there that night for that meeting when this group came in and made the presentation about that. And, Mike was asking them all these questions about, how they were going to access it and the clover leaf and all that. And,
oh my gosh.
Yeah, I mean, Mike's family owns most of that corner. And
You can put 40,000 cars a day easy on a divided highway, and
they were 6-lane, and if you go back and look, they were proposing it 20 years ago.
Wow.
Maybe
There's also something about
the board
Flint
might
Hill.
want to bring in stuff like that before we start talking to the developer, because all they're doing is just following the plans.
Well, how do you want to move forward on that?
Well, Mr. Fraser, you have a suggestion, did you have a suggestion about talking to the zoning administrator, or?
Well, I think that we would be better off, at least,
how about I engage the county administrator and ask him who on his staff?
yeah, because I don't really have a desire to talk to a developer that's operating in another county.
And their county administrator came out of the planning side, so.
There you go. Perfect.
Let's do that.
Oh, I did want to mention under the water quality thing too, it slipped my mind. Shortly before everything happened with COVID, Friends of the Rappahannock did an excellent study on the health of the streams and rivers in the area, and I don't think they've ever presented to this board, or if they have any updates that may be worthwhile.
They did it at your old location.
They did it at the brewery, and they did also to the Parks Authority at the time.
They threw the Russia River under the bus, which wasn't fair. But other than that, it was very good presentation.
And I wonder if they have any updates or if they have a presentation that they're doing
Yeah,
currently that may be of interest to us.
they're great, yeah.
Yep, I agree, yeah, absolutely.
Anything else, Van?
Good idea.
I only have two things. One, Settles is celebrating their 50th anniversary on April 9th. They're having a little lunch thing out back, but I just think that's fabulous, and it made me start wondering if the county should recognize businesses that have been so supportive of the citizens and the community for 50 years. I don't know, so that's a question.
Okay.
But I think that's pretty impressive, and it looks like they're planning on going on for another 50 years. And the other thing I've got is, just wanted to make sure that everybody noticed, Gail gave us this Department of Social Services document on this month is local leaders to share their support of community free of child abuse and help bring awareness to this significant issue by wearing a pinwheel pin throughout the month of April. So that's what your pinwheel is.
And there are some, you'll see around the grounds, my office, I think there's some out front here, some pinwheels in our planter gardens, just to bring awareness.
It shall be worn.
Yes. All right, that's it. Recess until 7 o'clock.
Thanks.
Oh, we need a motion, I guess?
No.
No, we don't. That's right, for a recess.
Hey, Art, can I
Thank
show
you.
you this real quick?
Yeah. Wow.